Okay.
Morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Jeffrey Leon, co-lead Commission Counsel. The next witness will be Keith Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson, will you swear on a religious document or do you wish to affirm?
I'll swear on the Bible.
For the record, please state your full name and spell it out.
Ian Keith Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N.
Do you swear that the evidence to be given by you to this commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do.
Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning.
I'd like to begin by getting some information on your background. I understand you're from Edmonton, Alberta.
That's right. I'm originally from Burlington, Ontario. Spent first part of my life here in Ontario and the balance of my life out west.
You and I did it the opposite ways. You practice law in Edmonton?
That's correct.
For how long?
I think I'm 27, 28 years at the bar now.
And you're a King's Counsel?
That's correct.
And can you describe for the commission the nature of your practice?
I've typically, throughout the course of my career, dealt with people who are up against bigger forces than them. I have represented many landowners and farmers and ranchers in Alberta in disputes with oil companies. But I've also, much of my practice has been focused on helping people when governments in their mind has gone too far, affecting their life or their business or their livelihood. And so I've done a lot of judicial review and administrative law and tribunal work.
Thank you. And have you, I take it you've appeared before all levels of Alberta courts and many regulatory tribunals?
That's right.
And can I ask the clerk to bring up WTS 6058? You attended an interview with me and my colleagues on October 2022?
That's correct.
And you were provided with a draft summary that was prepared by Commission Counsel.
That's right.
And you had an opportunity to review that summary, comment on it, and then you were provided with an amended version, which you also reviewed.
That's right.
And I'm showing you on the screen what we've, an interview summary. You recognize this as your interview summary?
I do.
And do you have any changes or corrections you want to make this morning?
No, other than, as we've heard from so many witnesses, there were so many events occurring and it was some time ago, but to the best of my recollection, this is accurate.
Thank you.
If I can just interrupt, you have a tendency to speak rapidly. So if you could try and moderate it, that would be helpful. That's for the interpreters, obviously.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I'll be referring to your interview summary from time to time, but if at any time you need to refer to it, you just let me know and we can bring it up.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you some questions about how you became involved with the Freedom Convoy. I understand that you were contacted by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms on February 1, 2022.
Yes.
And at that time, you were acting on another matter through the JCCF.
That's correct.
And what was that retainer?
What happened was in the fall of 2021, my wife, who is a retired nurse, We've been married forever and have 4 kids. And she became very concerned about what she was seeing in terms of government policy, health policy. Felt that things were badly going awry, and she did something she's never done before, where she encouraged me to get involved and take a case. She's normally the gatekeeper because I tend to take too many cases. And Ms. Chipiuk, who I'd practiced law with in the past in other cases, approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to take a case at the Justice Center. They needed senior litigation counsel. I agreed. They told me I could pick whichever case I would like, and I'd been studying the travel mandates, and I thought they were ultra vires, the Aeronautics Act, and and also obviously breaching charter. And so I agreed to lead that case with former Premier Brian Peckford as our lead applicant.
And that case is still going on?
We just got struck on mootness, and we're appealing that to the Federal Court of Appeal.
And when was that?
We got struck not last Thursday, the Thursday before, while I was here. And then that led to on the 1st of February, I had a legal team meeting set up, noticed some extra people in the Zoom room, and let them in. And I was informed by one of the lawyers who I'd met for the first time on that Zoom call that the truckers in Ottawa that morning had reached out to the Justice Center and asked the Justice Center if they would provide legal support. The lawyers on the call told me that they'd assembled a team and they'd asked me if I would come to Ottawa the next morning and lead that team, and I agreed.
You were able to clear your schedule that quickly?
Well, I got spousal consent very quickly, so that helped tremendously. And yeah, I was.
Now, you say there was a team of 4 lawyers, I believe, in your statement?
That's right.
And who was on that team?
Eva Chipiuk,
Yes.
Andre Murmur, Tim Turple, and Allison Pechovic.
And had you been following the news about what was happening in Ottawa?
Yeah, I was very fascinated with how the convoy started to form. I was amazed at the rate at which the donations were coming in, just from following social media and the legacy media as well. And I thought, I want to really keep an, this is prior to February 1st, of course. And I thought, well, I really want to keep an eye on this. And I realized probably the easiest way to do that would to be make a nominal donation, and then I would get the email updates. So I donated $15, a little embarrassed about that, but just for the purpose of tracking and getting the regular email updates. I had no idea that a few days after I made that donation that I would be in downtown Ottawa.
And on a personal level, did you have a view of what was happening in Ottawa?
Well, I had a view. I think there's 2 questions there. Obviously, I had grave concerns about the government's policies and the harm that I'd witnessed in my own family, with our children, with my neighbors, with my friends, with my colleagues. So in that context, I have a very strong view that I think tremendous mistakes were made at a policy level. But with respect to the convoy, I felt that it was providing an opportunity for people who were also concerned to symbolize that concern and demonstrate it.
And at that point in time, what did you understand your retainer to be?
My instructions were to work with the leadership group to provide on-the-ground legal support. One of the things that we thought we would likely be doing, which we didn't end up having to do, was to obtain an injunction. We anticipated that we would have to defend injunctions, provide legal advice as to the types of activities that they're allowed to do and the things they're not allowed to do. Also, it was clear at that time, if you recall, I apologize if I'm talking too fast again, sir. If you recall that around that time, GoFundMe had publicly announced a suspension of the fundraising campaign. I was also told at the time of being engaged that work was underway to set up a not-for-profit corporation, Canada Corp, to ensure a proper organizational structure for the administration of the donations. Something else that I've done in my background that proved to be extremely useful, not only in Ottawa, but in the events since, is I've represented not-for-profit groups, and I've represented various industry organizations. So I've dealt with conflicts and strong personalities on boards of directors and seen the interpersonal quarrels that can arise. And some of the groups that I've represented have been comprised of independent ranchers. And upon arriving in Ottawa, I immediately realized this personality similarities between independent Alberta ranchers and independent truckers. So that's some context.
Okay, so the next day, February 2nd, you went to Ottawa, and I understand you went on a private aircraft?
Yes, it was a small, bumpy, I forget the name of it, but it's a twin prop. And we left at 8 a.m. We left at 8 a.m. on that February 2nd, and we landed in Ottawa at about 10:30. So it was not a luxury experience. We went up and down many times. We stopped in Medicine Hat. We stopped in Regina, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and then Thunder Bay. All the stops were to pick up additional lawyers and the accountant, or the last one to get fuel.
Now, at the time, did you consider or did you wonder, given the nature of your retainer, why you were being flown on a private aircraft?
Because at that time, the understanding of the interim orders under the Aeronautics Act is that it did not extend to private charter aircraft. And some of the passengers on that aircraft were unvaccinated. So that was a way for us to get to Ottawa quickly under the interim order.
And did you know at the time who was paying for the aircraft?
There was confusion about that, in the same way that there was confusion about, there was two other groups that had allegedly made arrangements for us to have hotel rooms when we arrived. And so the Justice Center made a backup plan to have a third hotel ready, and that's the one we ended up using. As we were boarding the plane, whoever was supposedly going to be paying for this charter turned out they weren't going to pay for the charter. And the Justice Center made the decision to send us anyway, and if necessary, they would pay for the charter if who had originally said they were going to pay for it didn't.
And do you know who ultimately paid for the charter?
I believe it was and I'm not certain about this, but I believe it was paid from funds donated through Chris Guerra's Adopt a Trucker.
Thank you. Now, you heard yesterday Ms. Belton's evidence about a conversation she had with you regarding disclosure of this flight.
Disclosure of, sorry?
Information about this flight.
Okay.
I believe she said she was told not to say anything about it.
No, that's not correct.
What do you have to say about that?
I had no discussion with Ms. Belton about this flight. I had no concerns about the flight. I'm double vaccinated. It wouldn't have mattered what aircraft I was on.
Okay. Now, I'd like to just pause here for a moment. I know that at this point you're acting as a lawyer, and to the extent that any of my questions would require you to disclose privileged information where privilege has not been waived, would you tell me and not answer?
I will, and just so everyone's clear, I do, in July, my clients instructed me to consider making myself available as a witness, and granted a waiver with respect to these matters, this proceeding. And we've subsequently confirmed it in writing to avoid any confusion that I am here today with a waiver from my clients with respect to solicitor-client privilege.
And when you say your clients, who did you include in that?
The clients include Freedom Corp. So that's their short name for the full legal name of the not-for-profit. It includes Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, Danny Bulford, Tom Marazzo, Sean Thiessen, Miranda Gracer, Joe Jantz, Dale Enns, and Ryan Mihilowicz. And I believe that's the full list.
I understand that during the period we're about to talk to, you were also dealing with Chad Eros.
That's correct.
Was he part of your client group?
He was offered an opportunity to become a client and did not sign a retainer agreement.
Well, my understanding is his position is he was a client and that he has not waived privilege.
That's fine. And out of an abundance of caution, we can respect that. I do know that the absence of a retainer was confirmed by him in writing, so to me.
And if at any time you're in doubt about privilege and you need time to consult with Mr. Miller, you'll just let me know.
I absolutely will. Thank you.
Now, so you arrived in Ottawa then with the group in the evening of February 2nd?
That's correct.
And understand you rented a car and went to the Ark Hotel.
Yeah, I was in a taxi with Dwayne, and I can't recall specifically who else was with me. And then the others rented a car. So we had two modes of getting there, and the decision was to get me and Dwayne downtown as quick as possible because we had so little time to deal with whatever we anticipated coming. While we were on the plane, we received a briefing on and reviewed the emails from GoFundMe, which are in the record here, setting out all of their concerns. And then we drafted during that flight a substantive, I think my letter is 4 or 5 pages addressing each of the issues that GoFundMe had raised. So we were working on that flight. We wanted to get downtown to meet the clients, sign retainer agreements, and brief them and give them an opportunity to review that letter to GoFundMe so we could get it to GoFundMe as soon as possible.
Okay. And you went to the Ark Hotel, am I right?
That's correct.
And that's downtown Ottawa, Slater and Metcalf, I believe.
Yep. The vehicle we were in drove right up to the front door of the hotel, just like it would today.
And when you got to the Ark Hotel, understand you met with Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, and was there anybody else there?
Yeah, Miranda Gracer was there. Sean Thiessen was there. And I believe that's it. There might have been 1 or 2 other people in the room, but that's the best of my recollection.
And had you met any of these people before?
No, never.
Had you at any time heard about Ms. Leach?
Yes, I heard about her, but only in the context of the Freedom Convoy. Anything else I learned about Ms. Leach, I'm pretty sure I Googled her as soon as I was starting to watch the convoy form. So this would be in, late January, to try and understand who she was. But I've had no prior dealings with her or awareness of who she was or what she was engaged in until I Googled her because of the convoy.
Okay. And about what time did you arrive at the hotel?
My memory is it was about 11:30 at night.
Okay. And could you tell the commissioner what happened at that point in
Well,
brief?
sure. Well, I mean, first of all, we drove through the downtown, so that was my first chance to see where all the trucks and the protest vehicles were and all the signage and so on. And how you could still drive around. There was always one lane open. That's how we got right to the hotel. When I walked into the lobby, I could really feel the tension. There was truckers everywhere. There was supplies stacked and piled everywhere. And the tension was, I could really feel the tension.
So can we come to the meeting that you had with your prospective, at that time, prospective clients? So you said did you finalize your retainer at that point?
Yes. Andre Muirmer had the paperwork and had them sign.
And did the nature of your retainer differ from what you told us about what your understanding was about it?
Well, and I should clarify one thing, that the way the Justice Center operated at that time, the retainer has their name on it, the Justice
Yes.
Center, as the legal provider. Was the retainer different? No. At the nature of my anticipated involvement remained constant.
And I take it you then proceeded to get to know your clients?
Yeah.
How long did that evening meeting last? You got there at 11:30. When did it end?
Not that long. Everybody was exhausted. We had just had, landing and taking off several times in a small aircraft is a little bit hard on the body. And not to mention, I had I'm sure all of the people on our team were the same. This happened so fast. We had very, very little sleep. We could tell the fatigue. And that was when I first was informed that Tamara was aware that some group was calling a press conference for the next day and they wanted her to speak. And I immediately started asking questions about, okay, who's called the press conference? What's its purpose? Who all speaking? Was there a media advisory? She didn't know, this is not her world. I've dealt with high profile cases and communication specialists extensively. So she didn't even know what a media advisory was.
Okay, and I understand that you wrote out her remarks for her.
Well, what happened was I had no intention of being in the media. I was there to not be in the media, but to provide guidance. And even in that first meeting, I started hearing these different groups' names. And I was, okay, well, who is this group and why are they here? And what this other group? It was the chessboard was the fog was starting to lift. And I was sort of, oh boy, this is going to get complicated. The major concern I had was two things. Tamara made it clear to me that she did not feel comfortable. Appreciate she's absolutely exhausted. They all were. I could see the fatigue. And she didn't feel comfortable being exposed to a long format press conference where every media person could come at her, basically. And so I was already giving some thought as to how we could possibly restructure the press conference to make it more orderly and make it more effective in conveying some information that I thought the public and the world wanted to hear.
So, and you did you prepare her remarks for her?
So the next morning, my legal team was adamant that I should take a more active role in the press conference. I was initially reluctant. when we got from our hotel, which was out of the downtown, to the Ark and went into one of the logistics rooms on the main floor. It's a big boardroom. I got more information about the plan for the press conference, and that was, it was going to include a number of medical doctors. And
Sir, my question was just whether you prepared her remarks, Tamara Litch's remarks for her.
there was Take Back Our Freedoms had a external communication consulting firm that had prepared a speech for her. A number of us, including Tamara Leach, reviewed it, did not like the messaging. So Ms. Chipiuk and another individual, a medical doctor, rewrote it. It still wasn't in Ms. Leach's voice. So I assisted Ms. Leach in revising that statement, and it was finalized in very short order because we only had less than an hour. And then she proceeded to the press conference to deliver it.
And Mr. Clerk, can I ask you to bring up JCF 50155? It's a video. And I'd just like to play 1 minute from that.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Keith Wilson. I'm a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. As some of you may know, there was an announcement earlier today that the Justice Center and a team of lawyers are here on the ground in Ottawa to assist the truckers and the Freedom Convoy 2022 with whatever legal needs they might have. What we're going to do today in this brief press conference is you're going to hear from Tamara Leach, who we all know is the spark that lit this fire and the leader of this organization. You're also going to hear from Joanie Pelletier, who is going to summarize in French what Tamara says.
Okay, can I ask you to
And
stop
then-
it there, please? You say that Ms. Leach was the spark that lit this fire. Who told you that?
That no one told me that.
Where did it come from?
My brain.
Okay. And how did your brain figure that out?
Well, I observed what was happening and I noticed that this is again prior to me being engaged, that she seemed to be the organic leader. She was the one that was doing the Facebooks, lives and other videos. She was the one who was sending out the message, and she seemed to have the personality of a natural leader that inspired others to get behind her.
Thank you. Now, can you bring up, Mr. Clerk, HRF 40139? And this is a letter to GoFundMe that I think dated February 3rd, and that's the letter you told us was drafted on the plane, correct?
That's correct.
And just if you can scroll up, please, a little more. You note at the bottom there, you set out your understanding of the evolving goals of the committee's GoFundMe campaign.
Yes.
And if you can just scroll up, I won't read them, but that's what you understood to be the goals.
Just one moment. Yes.
And if you can just scroll up a little more, stop there. The paragraph beginning, everyone has been surprised. You say the last sentence there, the truckers have been open with the media that they are not leaving until the government vaccine mandates are lifted. Who on the plane provided that information?
I think it might have been either in some of the drafts that Mr. Eros had prepared, and understand that we did a draft on the plane. So that would have been the, is that the Wednesday night? Anyway, the February 2nd. Then we had the letter reviewed by the clients. And then the letter the next morning was reviewed by the finance committee back in Alberta. And a number of people requested, as normally occurs if you circulate a draft, that words and sentences be added. So I don't know exactly whether that arose in the very first draft or whether that was something that some of the leaders in Ottawa had added, or whether that was something that the finance committee wanted added.
And can you just scroll up a little more, please? You note in the second bolded paragraphs that the intention is not to reimburse those committing unlawful acts or criminal acts, and you say the convoy has been clear, it only supports peaceful assembly. At this point in time, I take it you were aware that there were some officials that were suggesting that some of the conduct going on was unlawful?
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. And what I've always struggled with is, at what point in time did those officials believe it became an unlawful assembly, and on what basis? Because it just seemed to be a terminology that started to morph and become adopted with no particular triggering event or explanation as to what that individual or official thought constituted an unlawful assembly.
And later that day, you attended a phone meeting with GoFundMe.
That's correct.
And among other people.
That would have been on the, that would have been on the Thursday afternoon.
Yeah. And among other people, Mr. Eros was on that call.
Yeah, all of the lawyers that were with me and a number of the board members from Freedom Corp were there, as well as Ms. Leach.
And Mr. Clerk, can you bring up WTS 6032 and go to page 8? This is a witness statement provided by Chad Eros. And he made certain statements in there, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure.
On page 8, he says that the, if you can scroll up. A little more, please. I'm not seeing it right now, but he does say that the JCCF lawyers, and specifically you, were trying to take over the meeting and assert themselves as the spokespeople on the financial side of the convoy. Do you remember reading that?
I don't remember reading that.
Right there, and where it says Mr. Wilson trying to take over the meeting. All I want to know is whether you want to respond to that.
Well, I mean, what does that mean? When I led the meeting, someone needs to lead a meeting from when you have two parties. Mr. Eros spoke, other lawyers spoke. Mr. Eros spoke extensively in explaining to the GoFundMe executives and their legal team, because I would estimate by memory, there was 10 to 12 people from GoFundMe on the other side of the conference call. This was a call, not a Zoom.
Yeah. And you mentioned, sorry.
And we relied heavily, at least our side, on Mr. Eros explaining the financial controls and who he was and his background in banking and as a CPA, and his role as treasurer. But yes, I did lead the discussion. That is true.
And I understand as well that you had some discussions with Mr. Eros about the organization Take Back Our Freedoms.
Yes.
And did Ms. Leach have some concerns about that organization?
Yes.
And what were those concerns?
My memory is, as I indicated in my witness statement, and it wasn't just Take Back Our Freedoms, this was happening extensively, and it happened immediately, or I observed it immediately after the first day when I actually started to, appreciate I'm coming in at night and go through the lobby and up to a hotel room and then back out. The next day, I'm now starting to interact more, and I'm now in a big boardroom, and there's these different people coming and going, and I'm trying to figure out who's who. There was no organization chart. There was no introduction session. It's not even like a meeting where you go around the table and introduce one another. That didn't happen. It was constant chaos. So I learned that there was a group, and then I learned that it was this TBOF. I didn't even know what TBOF meant initially. And then I'd heard about this Canada Unity. And then there was Mr. Bourgel's group, Something for Freedom. Then there was Veterans for Freedom. I could go on. There were so many different groups I was starting to learn of. And what I observed was that different groups were trying to take control. And what I observed and believed to be true is that some were trying to take control because they saw the organic, flat hierarchy largely of the convoy and wanted to make it more successful and felt they had the organizational capability to do that. Other groups seemed to want to reshape the Freedom Convoy into their own event, branded theirs. And I got the distinct impression from some others that they were trying to get their hands on what at that point was $10 million in donations. And my impression and my recollection from the discussions that I would have with Ms. Leach as various people would demand private meetings or play games and say we weren't allowed to use the boardroom because it was their boardroom, those sorts of things, that she was under pressure from a lot of these different groups for the reasons I've given.
Okay, and coming back to Take Back Our Freedoms, am I correct that Mr. Peckford was the chairman of that organization?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's more of a symbolic chairman. In all of my discussions with the Honorable Brian Peckford, I would speak with him not every evening, but maybe every second or third evening. My telephone logs confirm that I've tendered in evidence, and I was looking for guidance from him. He was, he's an elder statesman. He's been through a lot. He's one of the founding fathers of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, very seasoned politician. And so at no time did we ever have any discussion around Take Back Our Freedoms. Did I feel he was speaking on their behalf? Him and I become somewhat close through my work on his federal travel mandate charter challenge in federal court. And I was using him as a resource and someone to run ideas past and get guidance from.
And am I correct that you were aware that at least Mr. Eros had some concern that if there were concerns about Take Back Our Freedoms and you were acting on behalf of Mr. Peckford in that other litigation, that you were in a conflict of interest position?
That was never raised at any time. I don't feel I was in a conflict because at no time did Mr. Peckford ever ask of anything of me. I was the only one who asked of things from him. And the concerns that you're referring to are concerns that were never aired at any time during Ottawa by Mr. Eros, and only some months later after the Ottawa protest had concluded.
Okay, thank you. And just to shift a little bit here, you were staying at the Ark Hotel, is that?
No,
Where were you staying?
at a Best Western, I believe it was about a 20-minute drive towards the east.
So you arrived there, excuse me, on February.
20-minute drive from downtown. So
Right.
each day it took us 20 minutes to get into the downtown core.
And so you arrived there on, did you stay there the night of February 2nd?
That's correct.
And when did you leave?
Our stay there ended, it would have been approximately around the Sunday of, just trying to visualize a calendar here. The second Sunday would have been, anyway, I think we stayed there for about 10 days.
And then where did you go?
Then we went to the Swiss Hotel.
And how long did you stay there?
We stayed there until the Wednesday, which would have been the 16th. It was on the Wednesday that it was apparent. This was when I had the phone call from Steve Kay, city manager, advising me that the third attempt to move trucks was going to be unsuccessful, and he was very disappointed, as he himself testified here.
Okay, and I was just asking you the date, sir. And,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to contextualize things, and I have to remember things by events because I wasn't calendar focused. And so it was that day that it became apparent that something dramatic was about to happen by the government and the police. And as a result, Miss Leach instructed Miss Chipiak and I, because we were the only two lawyers left on the ground at that point, to relocate to a new hotel,
and where was that?
La Germaine.
And how long did you stay there?
I stayed there until the Sunday, which would be the 20th or the 21st, I believe.
And then did you go back to Edmonton?
I went home, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have interaction during the period you were there with James Bowder?
No. And if I did, it might have been where I was in a room or in a hallway or on a sidewalk and he shook my hand, but I met so many people.
Okay.
The interaction would have been unremarkable.
And you became aware of his, or Canada Unity's memorandum of understanding?
Yeah, very early on, I was approached by many people, both within the client group and others, asking me about it.
And I believe, is it fair to say it was in your, from your perception, getting a lot of attention, and you talked to a lot of people about it?
Yeah, they would ask me. I didn't make it a topic that I felt I needed to discuss with others, but I did get asked it a lot. And what the first thing that's obvious about it is a memorandum of understanding in its simplest legal concept requires all parties to it to sign. And it was evident that the signature lines on the last page were not going to be signed by the Governor General, nor someone from the Senate. And in any event, I would explain when I was asked by the board to brief them on it, I explained, and I apologize for my voice, I'm recovering from a cold.
There's water there if you need it.
Yeah, thank you. That I explained that there's only two ways that governments change under our parliamentary system. The first is when the Prime Minister contacts the Governor General and dissolves Parliament and asks that the writ be dropped. The second, through parliamentary tradition, is where a bill is identified as a confidence vote and Parliament votes to defeat the bill. In that second instance, the Prime Minister would similarly contact the Governor General. This idea that a certain number of people could sign a document and that would somehow compel or incentivize and lead to a change in government, I explained consistently and repeatedly, is legal nonsense.
And you knew that, did you know at the time that almost somewhere around 300,000 people had signed on to a petition regarding that?
I didn't know the number. I knew that it pre-existed the convoy. I knew that Canada Unity pre-existed the convoy as a group by at least a year or two, that it was not a creation of the convoy. It was one of these hanger-ons.
So I take it you were surprised that so many people were taking it seriously. Is that fair to say?
I am very surprised at, this is not the first time I've run into this. I've had to litigate opposite the sovereign citizen folks and quoting admiralty law and think that if they present a flag in a certain way in a court, the judge loses jurisdiction. I've had to encounter this many, many times in my career. So I was just like, here's another one.
Okay, now on February 4th, I understand you were served with a statement of claim and an injunction motion by Mr. Champ.
That's correct.
And you represented the convoy leaders in that matter?
Yeah, not everyone who was named at that time is my memory. That pleading has been amended a number of times and is a evolving document, is to be expected in a litigation of that nature.
And did you oppose the injunction?
What we did was we received it at approximately 4 o'clock. That was at the same time that we also received notification publicly that GoFundMe had determined that the fundraiser violated their terms of service and that they were stopping it and either going to send the money to some other group or refund it. We had a lot going on. We were served with a motion record, emergency motion returnable the Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So my legal team and I prepared through the night. Mr. Champ continued to provide supplemental materials in the magnitude of hundreds of pages. We had everything ready to go by noonish the next day, but not even enough time for me to read the factum. So I took the...
Did you oppose the motion?
I'm answering your question, sir. We took the position that it was just improper for the court to hear it on the Saturday. We agreed to come back on the Monday. I had informed my clients that there is no way the court was not going to grant the injunction, and that the best we could do was to ensure that the terms of the injunction order were not excessive, were not prone to abuse and arbitrariness, and had an acknowledgement of their right to protest. So we, the real argument before the court was, what is the terms of the order going to be, and overcoming the challenge of in rem versus in personam orders.
Thank you. Now, around that same time, I understand from your witness statement that you had some discussions with Mr. Marazzo about his concerns that there seemed to be a change in tone in the response of the Ontario Police Service to the protesters.
Yeah, the Ottawa Police Service, that's correct.
And that change in tone was related to what Mr. Marazzo saw as a shift from a negotiation type response to a surge and contain enforcement type response. Is that right?
Precise.
And was that consistent with your view?
Yeah, and we had, to the extent we had the opportunity, because as you can appreciate, it was a very, very fast-moving, chaotic environment with so many either interpersonal issues arising between the players or logistical issues or whatever. But we did have occasion when we were, Ms. Chipiak and I were leaving our hotel, we worked, it must have been the Monday when we were in court, because we ran those from our hotel outside of downtown. And we heard Ms. Deans in an interview on CBC's As It Happens. And her language was deeply troubling. And that combined with Mr. Marazzo expressing concerns about the change in tone from Chief Slowly, it heightened the urgency of trying to find a way to open up dialogue. And I had, if you look at my phone records, you'll see that my first attempt to bring in Mr. French occurred actually that weekend.
Okay. And what was your strategy as a result of this?
Well, in my past, I've been involved in two international scope crises. The first was the 2003 mad cow disease outbreak in Alberta, where I was representing a government agency. And the second was in 2009 H1N1, where I represented the people who were patient zero for the zootonic transmutation. And so I've been in emergency operations centers of government on two major incidences, and I've seen the chaos that occurs in there. And, you know, I know the importance of dialogue and communication, and I know I sense the danger of the parties not talking, even if it's back channel. So I had a strong desire to open up back channel communications so we could bring the temperature down, start to see if there's ways to resolve this, de-escalate this, wind this thing down. So that was a heavy focus of mine at all times.
Okay, and I take it that you contacted Mr. Peckford and asked him if he had any contacts that might help?
Yes.
And then you received a call from Dean French.
That's correct.
And in your statement, you indicate that Mr. French suggested that what was needed was to move trucks out of the residential areas. Is that right?
Yeah, he laid down some ground rules, sort of base conditions for his willingness to get involved and try and be an intermediary. And so I still remember, and Eva Chipiak's reminded me of it, that we had a very, very intense phone call where he was testing me and I was testing him. But what he made absolutely clear was that the truckers had to be willing to move out of the residential areas. And I had to be honest with him about whether I thought that was achievable. And once he learned to trust me and I learned to trust him, we both thought it was achievable. So then he proceeded to go to work.
To which?
to go to work on it,
Oh.
go behind the scenes. And I wasn't asking for the details. That's not how it works. If you've ever done this before, you just let them go do their thing behind the scenes and they will come back to you at the appropriate time.
And on February 8th, I understand that Mr. Marazzo asked if you and Ms. Chipiuk would come to a meeting at City Hall.
Yeah, what had happened was I first met Mr. Marazzo on the Thursday that we had the press conference. It was later in the day that I was introduced to him. It's the first time I had met him. I immediately was impressed with his calmness and his level-headedness. There was a lot of emotion up and down with various individuals in these rooms, but Tom was always just completely calm. And he had been observing for longer than us. And he had been working with the police liaisons and felt that he was in a circle where nothing material was arising. And he advised in the meeting room, I remember he came in, he'd left a meeting with the PLTs and had told them that he didn't want to speak with them anymore and he needed somebody that was more of an inspector level, somebody who had some actual decision-making capability and greater authority. Things went quiet. The next morning, this would be now the Tuesday.
February 8th?
Correct. Tom told Ms. Chipiuk and I that he wanted us to come to a meeting at City Hall at noon. And I said, okay, what's this all about? And does the city know we're coming? Because one thing that is a certainty of lawyer will of any experience will share with you is that it's always a bad idea for your client to unexpectedly bring lawyers to meetings. It never goes well. So I've never before consented to that in my 27 years. But this being such an unusual circumstance, I agreed that we would go. And we arrived at City Hall and had quite an interesting interaction in order to get upstairs to meet with Steve Kay.
Okay, and I take it that you met with the PLT officers and they weren't very happy about your being there, is that right?
Animatedly angry. Yeah.
And so, as you indicate in your statement, you told them that to try and cool things down, that you would seek instructions not to impose the continuation of the injunction, which was coming up in court.
That's correct. The only thing you go through your pockets and see what do I have. And I had nothing. And Eva, Ms. Chipiuk, as astute as she is, pointed out that there was one thing that we did control. And that was what recommendation we could make to the board about what position they would take on the continuation of the injunction, because Justice McLean had issued it for a set number of days. I can't remember the number of days, but it was only set, and we had a returnable date that was coming up in the following, later that week, I believe. You can figure it out from the pleadings. So we said that we would seek instructions from our client not to oppose it becoming a long-term injunction. So the quiet that had resulted from the injunction would remain, and that was what we offered.
Had it been your instructions to oppose the continuation of that injunction?
I had not yet received instructions at that point.
And I take it that you ultimately had the meeting with Mr. Kanellakis?
Yes.
And were you here for his testimony?
Yes.
And is there anything about what he testified to regarding the meeting that you disagree with?
There was a couple of sort of nuanced details, but that I think he might have just been misremembering, at least, or alternatively I am, but nothing of substance.
Okay, and subsequent to that meeting, or sorry, let me take a step back.
Sure.
I understand that he had two concerns. One was to keep the meeting secret because he didn't want it to get out if there wasn't a successful negotiation. And he wanted to move trucks from the residential area and the Rideau Sussex intersection.
Yeah, he'd given us a list of 3. So I led by saying once Evan and I went into the room, and I know there was some conflicting testimony. There was 3 PLTs in that room. There was 7 people in that room. I know someone testified, I think it was one of the, it might have been Drummond, that there was no police in the room. That is absolutely false. And he's likely just wasn't accurately briefed, I suspect. And I led by saying, okay, give us your top 3. If we can get movement at 3 locations in the downtown, if we can move trucks and protesters, where can we provide the most immediate and effective relief? And they gave us the 3 locations, and one of them was Kent, and I can't recall the other 2. But what I also picked up on, as did Tom Marazzo and Eva Chipiuk, is that they spent almost the entirety of the time talking about Rideau and Sussex. And so even though we had this list, it was clear to me and to us as a team that Rideau and Sussex was in a category by itself. So we promised them at the end of the meeting that we would keep the meeting secret. And the reason that that was important, it's in these situations, it's always about building trust. And it's the littlest things you can control that build the trust. And so we agreed to keep the meeting secret. And in fact, no word got out about the meeting. And I said, and I'm not from Ottawa, so, you know, I was stuck in buildings. And then when I was on the move, it was often at night. So I was very spatially disoriented all the time. And so I said to Eva Chipiuk, who had done her, I don't think it was her Master of Laws. I think it was her undergrad or her LLB here in Ottawa. So she was very familiar with the area, and Tom obviously was. So I said, can you please take me to Rideau and Sussex? Sorry.
Okay, so take it after the meeting, the 3 of you went to the intersection?
That's correct.
And Mr. Clerk, could you bring up HRF 401550? Take it, this is a picture that you took of the intersection at that time?
Yeah, I took several pictures, including a picture with Mr. Marazzo and Ms. Chipiuk in it. I started doing that just to help keep track of things. You know, you get metadata on your phone, so it shows exactly what time and place. So I started taking these pictures.
Now, you indicate in your statement that at some point you left the intersection and Ms. Chipiuk and Mr. Marazzo remained to talk to the protesters?
Yeah, we decided, and this is the way things worked, particularly with the people that were there involved in the protest, is if something needed to be done, you did it right there and then. You never waited. So the decision, we had a discussion, and it was Eva and Tom were like, well, why don't we try and move this intersection right now? So I said, all right, I'll go back to the Sheridan. And the reason that we agreed that I would go is because we had so little to negotiate with in terms of tools and tactics with the protesters. Because I had been on the stage at the press conference the week previous, I was recognized as the truckers' convoy lawyer. So the idea was that if they made significant progress but needed just something more to get the truckers to agree to clear this intersection, that they would say, well, we're going to have Keith come. And then I would come and try and use whatever influence I may have. So that was the plan. And to be clear, because there's been conflicting evidence about this, Our focus at this intersection was to clear it, which is very different from the deal with the mayor, what the objective was.
Yeah.
This was to clear this intersection. And as soon as we got there, we could see why it was such a concern. I think there's 6 streets that come together. There's the very high-end condo tower. There's the US Embassy down the road, the Senate, and on and on. And we're like, okay, we understand why they want this cleared. So our goal was at least to clear up the westbound lanes.
And if we can bring up, back up your witness summary, WTS 6058 at page 7. And can you scroll up a bit? You said out there, in the interest of time, I'm not going to take you through it all, of what happened at Rideau and Sussex that led up to your finding out that there was a willing, or at least Ms. Chipiuk and Mr. Marazzo, the bottom paragraph, finding out that the truckers had agreed to move their vehicles to Wellington, but there was a problem in removing the Jersey barriers, and that fell through.
Correct. Well, and it was not, what had happened was, my briefing is that we had an advantage because the first 3 big trucks that would have to move were the ones that had the Polish immigrants. And Miss Chipiuk is Polish background and can speak Polish fluently. And she very quickly developed a rapport with these truckers. And we knew if we could get the first 3 to go, it would incentivize the other ones to join in. There was a sense of each of these areas that people didn't want to be left alone, that there was a real group think going, we picked up. So, but this was an intense group. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you've heard about that. There was this Forfada stuff that the first time I heard it was in this inquiry, so it was never on our radar. But so Mr. Marazzo gathered, about 80 of them together and in the middle of the intersection, surrounded by their vehicles, and got them to pick amongst themselves 2 representatives. Then he moved forward in effectively a parley in the old military sense with the police to the west up to closer to Wellington. And then the particular police liaison, Sergeant Feng Li, had a little bit of an aggressive personality. He could really turn aggressive very quickly. And Mr. Marazzo was concerned about him interacting directly with the trucker leaders from that intersection. So Tom went up, spoke to Feng and said, okay, bring in the equipment. We're ready to move at least half the intersection, the westbound, up into that space on Wellington. Feng, Mr. Lee's phone rang. He stepped back and then turned around and said to Tom, the deal's off. They're not going to move the barricades. And we now know from the record and the testimony of others that others higher up the command vetoed that movement. Okay. So Tom, but this is important, Tom did not go back and disclose what actually happened. He said they just can't get the barriers moved because he didn't want to destroy what little progress we had made. We agreed to have a cooling off because a lot of the truckers were upset. They had arrangements to make kinds of moves before our involvement, and they felt that the police had double-crossed them. And so we decided to give everything a cooling off and a try again on the Thursday.
And so that was on February 8th. And I take it that February 9th, there were some discussions with the OPS PLT officers, and that led to February 10th, where you returned to Rideau and Sussex to try again. Is that?
Yeah, on the 9th, PLTs, about 4:40 p.m., contacted me through Eva Chipiuk. That was the protocol we had, is that if they needed to get me urgently, they would call her because she was always at my side. And they came over to a meeting in the main floor of the Sheraton. It was an intense meeting. But we briefed the board that evening, and Tamara Leach requested that all of the road captains, all legal, the board members all assemble at Sussex, or Rideau and Sussex, the next morning prior to 10 a.m. in an all-out effort to use their persuasive skills. We had an initial success where there was a load safe truck that you'll see in lots of pictures. Load safe is what was on the logo on the side of the cargo trailer of the semi truck. And it was parked right by the valet area of the Chateau Laurier, and it was pulled up on an angle, almost jackknife, blocking almost 4 lanes, and the police did not like it at all. They'd been trying to move it, and I was standing with a large group of PLTs, Miss Leach and others. Mr. Barber came up. We said, hey, I said, Chris, or one of us said to Chris, is there any way you could go talk to that guy? And as you heard, we all watched in amazement. Chris jumped up on the step and was hanging onto the mirror. The window came down. He started visiting with the guy for a few minutes, and all of a sudden Chris hollered out for truckers to come and set up a perimeter to safely back him up. And the backup alarm went on, and they repositioned him so he was right up against the curb. And I remember we all thought, okay, this is a good sign. Maybe we're going to do this.
And then, as you say in your statement, there was a crowd that suddenly appeared who didn't understand what was going on, and they, in effect, kind of surrounded the area.
What, just a little bit more detail, because I think it's important for context.
If I can just stop you for 1 second, I do have a video. Would that help?
I'd like to contextualize it first, if I could.
Sure.
So what happened was we had a bunch of failed attempts to get enough truckers to agree. We always had the Polish guys at the front that were ready to go. So a lot of the team, or those of us who were there to try and clear that intersection, were done. It was a very, very cold day. I was back and forth trying to keep warm in the lobby of the Chateau Laurier. That's when I got served with one of the seizure orders and was dealing with the TD Bank on interpleader. There was so many things going on all the time. In any event, we'd largely given up. It was just about to get dark. And then one of the PLTs came out of the area, and he came up, and Tamara was with me and a couple of others, and said, they're ready to go. And Tamara's like, well, then let's do it. So they called in the big heavy lift equipment to lift the barricade, and they end up bringing a tow truck as well, a flatbed tow truck, because you may have saw one of those pictures. They have these orange mechanical devices that are actually bolted to the ground, and when the vehicle drives over it, it comes up behind it. So we were waiting. It was now getting dark, and as was typical, as you get into 4 or 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, the number of Ottawa residents and others that would start to converge in the downtown would significantly increase each night. This was typical of that. When the trucks and the heavy equipment arrive, they've got yellow flashing lights, they have backup alarms. That caused even more people to come. Because we were anticipating moving the trucks up past the War Memorial to Wellington, we needed, the police were obviously handling this part of it, more police to create a safety corridor so that no one got run over. And as the one vehicle backed up and its alarm was very loud, people started to rush in. Tamara had been removing from the barricades the signs. No one out, the police were smart not to go and start taking signs down. It was Tamara, she was recognized. So she would place the signs over on another railing by the Senate to get the barricades ready to be removed safely without controversy, hopefully. Just as the equipment was going, people rushed behind the tow truck because they seemed to think that the police were about to do something bad to the truckers. I was talking to them. Tamara was individually talking to groups of people. It's okay. This is a cooperative move. We're trying to clear this intersection. The truckers want to move up to Wellington. And then people would sit on a barricade. Tamara would go talk to them. They'd apologize, get off the barricade. She'd turn around and they were on another, different people were on another barricade. And then the police were further in. Tamara and I were trying to talk to as many people as we could to explain that it was okay. This is a cooperative move. We're just trying to clear an intersection. And then the people just swarmed in, and that's where the video plays.
Okay, can you pull up please HRF 401587?
And I'm in the orange high visibility coat, which they jokingly called my trucker camo.
Stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. I'd like to move back to your statement, please. That's WTS 6058. And we only have about 15 minutes, so I think we're going to try and speed it up a bit.
Excuse me, that video was what date?
That would have been on the Thursday, sir. That would have been February 10th, the evening. That would have been about 5 o'clock.
Sorry, go ahead.
Now, you set out, starting at page 9 of your statement, your dealings with Mr. French and leading up to a meeting with him on February 11th, where he presented to you a draft letter from the mayor, and you went and got instructions, and you discussed it with the board, and the board agreed essentially to go ahead with the proposed deal to move trucks out of the residential areas. Is that?
That's correct. And the proposal was never just to move up to Wellington. It was always recognized that probably only 25% of the vehicles could go to Wellington. The more dominant theme of the plan was for the vehicles to move to the remote locations at Embrun, Exit 88, and Arnprior, and to have expand the shuttle buses that were already running. And there was also, this is a very important point, and I don't know that it's come out yet, is a lot of people who were there, the truckers, never planned to stay that long. But the Canadians they met along the way, and the stories and the heartache that they heard, and the trust and plea that they heard from those people, many of the truckers I talked to felt this obligation to stay as long as they could, but they also needed a way to leave gracefully and respectfully. And one of the things we recognized was that if 75% of the vehicles were going to be given an opportunity to leave and go either to Embrun or Arnprior, that some would actually use it as an opportunity to go home and do so respectfully. So that was an important part of the plan.
And that's what you refer to in your statement as an exit strategy.
Correct.
And in that regard, if you can bring up, please, HRF 401278. And this is an email, excuse me. It starts at the top, February 12th, from you.
It's in reverse chronological order. So
Yes.
that would be the latest response. I had prepared following the board meeting on the Friday evening where the board decided to approve the deal. They were all there in person except for Mr. Dichter, who was incapacitated due to his broken leg and had to stay at the Sheraton, but we had him joined by conference call. And because of the significance of this, even though on the Friday they had all agreed to proceed with the deal with the mayor, I wanted to get something documented. So I sent an email to all of the board. You can see where it says right just by where the mouse is, a little bit up and to the left, a GIDG. That's a part of Bridget Belton's email address. You'll also see, you can see Mr. Dichter's emails on this as well. It's the first one on the CC line, actually. And I received responses from everyone approving it. It makes reference to the arrangement with the mayor. The plan was, how are we going to get the truckers on side? So the decision was made to do this Freedom Manifest document where Tamara, with all the board members signing at the bottom, would say it's time. We've had an impact. It's time to do something differently. It's time for us to focus our presence on Wellington, where our beef is with the federal government, for them, and for them to have the other trucks move out to the other locations.
Right. And if you can just scroll up, please. There, stop right there. You say in that email from February 12th at 3:47, you indicate that the drafting committee had looked into a way to draft a document that would describe the Freedom Convoy's overall demands of all governments and a way forward strategy. And so they were working on the broader document for review by the board tomorrow, but you're circulating a draft now as a and it was intended to be a communication for the captains and truckers regarding the deal with the mayor. And then you say towards the end of that line after Wellington and Elgin, while at the same time taking away the excuse that Trudeau wants to unleash the police goons and seize trucks. Remember, we are trying to block Trudeau from having the justification to cause the police to use the new emergency powers against the truckers and allow the truckers to stay here in Ottawa for as long as it takes, etc. Now, this is February 12th. At that point in time, did you anticipate use of the Emergencies Act?
Yes.
And further, rather than looking at what's the draft, can we pull up
Mr.
HRF 40?
Sorry, excuse me.
I apologize, Mr. Leon. Commissioner, I'd just like to make a note of the record, or perhaps a small objection. Ms. Belton testified yesterday that on the mayor's deal, and it was her understanding that it was all completely fake news. I think was the terminology she used. And as I understand it, Mr. Wilson is now testifying that this deal was sent to Ms. Belton as one of the convoy organizers and that they all agreed to it. I just note in fairness to the witness, I don't think that was put to her by the commission nor the convoy organizers or Freedom Corp. So, I mean, we're all working very hard, Herculean, and we're missing lots of things at times just because of the pace. But I think this is a rather important point that it's unfortunate we didn't hear from Ms. Belton on that issue.
What, I think at this stage, let's hear the evidence, and maybe that's a point that can be made later. But I'm sorry, you want to also involve yourself in this?
Yes, sir. I don't think the issue is whether or not Ms. Belton is being impeached. Frankly, I don't think it matters. So this commission doesn't need to make a finding of credibility of Ms. Belton. So I understand my friend's concern, and he's turning to the rule of Brown and Dunn. But I don't really even think it's a concern, sir. It's not material.
Okay.
HRF 401285. And this is the Freedom Manifest that was, I think you said there were about 800 copies made up and distributed to the truckers?
That's correct. About 850 copies were printed. We decided to go old school Gutenberg, printed press. In fact, I took a little video and had forwarded it to Dean French so that he could see that progress was being made on the efforts and the plan to get the information out to the truckers. The Chris Barber, Tamara, and others went out onto the streets and met with truckers, and the road captains handed these out. And Tamara even went out to Arnprior and Embrun to inspect them, to make sure that they had sufficient capacity to take all the 75% of the vehicles, and to meet with the owners of those lands to make sure they were comfortable with that many vehicles showing up in the coming days.
Okay, and I'm not going to ask they be pulled up now, but just for the record, we then had the exchange of letters between the mayor and Ms. Leach, which we've seen. The mayor's letter is HRF 401264, and Ms. Leach's letter is HRF 401275. Can I now ask to bring up HRF 401323? And this is a document dated February 17, 2022, open letter to our premiers and to our elected and appointed officials. It's a long letter, but I take it that the idea of this was still part of the exit strategy to do something to make contact with government officials so that people could be satisfied that you'd done all you could do to that point. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I think what we were hoping would happen is that the success that we felt we could achieve with the arrangement and the agreement with the mayor, and because if it was successful, we were going to have had the downtown cleared out by the Wednesday, but for Wellington up to the Sir John A, and a defined area, which they actually in the logistics meeting shorted up because of the issues about the hospital and so on access. And the truckers agreed to make it even a smaller area. Was that it would focus the protest now on the federal government, and then the federal government would be encouraged by the fact that the truckers proved to be honest brokers, and that would lead to a meeting with some federal ministers. There was not a strong desire to have a meeting with the Prime Minister. It was more with the ministers, and that we could agree on a process of formally presenting briefs and information and scientific information to support and comparative information, because Canada was an anomaly at this time in terms of our mandates. The other G7 countries weren't doing these things. to try and persuade the government to review its policies.
Thank you. And then we don't have to bring it up, but in your statement, page 10 and 11, you outline your understanding of what happened in terms of the movement of the trucks outside from the residential area, either to leave or up to Wellington, correct?
Yeah, well, I was directly involved, and on the Monday, and my text messages and my phone logs confirm it. My text messages with Sergeant Lee, with the mayor's chief of staff, and with the city manager. The reports I was getting from the ground were that the police were not in a position. They were getting blocked at different phases by the police. They finally got some trucks moved. We were ready to move trucks again on the Tuesday. Chris had worked and others, Joe Jantz and Ryan and Dale and others had gone out and worked hard to get a whole bunch of trucks ready to move on the Tuesday. Police completely blocked it. We now see all the back communications and infighting that was going on. We didn't know that at the time, obviously. And then again on the Wednesday. And the other thing is we realized when we discussed it, and I listened to the road captains and to the Chris Barbers, is they felt that once the big trucks moved, there would be stragglers, but they wouldn't want to be alone, and that they would either leave or they may go and infill a little bit. But so we recognized that. And there was also discussion that if, and this is controversial, but there was also discussion that if we get down to a few areas where everybody else has either gone up to Wellington or gone out to the base camps or gone home, and we have a few holdouts, that Freedom Corp would no longer provide any supplies, fuel, or materials to those areas to incentivize them to follow the lead of everyone else who was leaving downtown.
Thank you. I see I've gone up for my hour and a half, Commissioner. I have two more points to deal with if I could.
Sure.
Thank you. HRF 401298. This is a letter that you sent to Chief Bell stating your view on the powers that were the police were given under the Emergency Act.
Mm-hmm.
And you took issue with whether there was the power to prevent peaceful protesters from coming into Ottawa to protest.
Correct. And just to clarify, the letter is signed by Ms. Chipiuk, but I did review the letter. And we also had at least 4 or 5 other lawyers from the Justice Center reviewing the same statutory regulatory instruments. And we had all reached the same conclusion that the description that the government officials and the police were using to describe the measures was not even close to what the emergency proclamation actually said, and that as long as you were not seeking to interfere with international trade, disrupt or interfere with critical infrastructure, or engage in serious acts of violence against persons, you continued to have the right of political advocacy, protest, and dissent. And so the labeling by the police chief and others that any Canadian citizen was no longer allowed to walk in downtown Ottawa or hold a sign in front of their parliament was not legally accurate and was against the charter.
And I think we've seen the video that's, and you don't have to bring it up, HRF 50274 that you did with Mr. Barber to essentially giving that opinion and telling whoever saw the video that they could and should come to Ottawa and continue lawful protest.
We were in the 7th floor boardroom at the Sheraton. I just finished briefing the board on the legal review that had been completed of the proclamations. And Mr. Barber turned to me and said, come over here, sit on the arm of the chair, let's do a TikTok. And it literally happened that quick.
And in making that TikTok video, was it your understanding that there was about to be an enforcement initiative by the police to remove people from the red zone?
I didn't know for sure. What I did know is that there was numerous times where information would come into the operations center from various police sources that a raid was imminent, and it happened many times. And then the raids either did occur in part, such as Coventry, or other evenings where they would go and take firewood and fuel or food from one of the blocks. But it did appear from the buildup we were seeing on the ground, it was obvious, and the information we had about the number of, I don't know, there's some Lansdowne Park or someplace had been set up as a processing center. So it seemed that there was a shift occurring.
And did you have a concern about the fact that if that was going to happen, you were suggesting to people to come back into the red zone and potentially be in danger when the enforcement action started?
No, because I'm a Canadian and I never imagined that our government, our federal government, would use that level of force against nonviolent, peaceful Canadians.
And just a couple of final points. We heard Ms. Belton's evidence that her hotel bill had been paid by Mr. Bourgault. Have you ever met Mr. Bourgault?
Yes, I met Joseph a number of times. He's an amazing human being and very concerned Canadian. But I have no knowledge of any bills he was paying.
Who paid your hotel bill?
Who would have paid my hotel bill? I'm pretty sure the first hotel bill went on my firm Visa card, and then I was reimbursed by the Justice Center. The Germain was on my Visa card and was reimbursed. And then the Swiss was paid for, I believe, I don't know this with certainty, by Chris Guerra through Adopt a Trucker.
Thank you. And do you have any other information about Mr. Bourgault, about contributions he may have made to the Freedom Convoy in terms of how much or what for?
No, I do know that he helped pay for some meeting rooms. I don't think when Mr. Marazzo and Mr. Bulford were holding their press conferences at the Lord Elgin, I don't think he paid for that, but he might have. And it was mostly the only firsthand knowledge I have was hotel rooms.
Okay, and then there's two other documents that I want to ask you about. The first one is HRF 60. Just let me get it here. Eight three. And this was a press release, February 17, 2022, from the Freedom Convoy indicating that they did not support any of the comments being made by Mr. King. I may have asked you this, but had you met Mr. King?
I knew of Mr. King over a year prior to going to Ottawa. He had a court matter in Red Deer where he was all over social media saying that he's found this magic recipe for defeating all government laws, and I researched it, read the court's decision, and it was clear he was misunderstanding how the law works. So I knew of him from then, and I knew that he was a very loud voice. When I found out that he was here, I told the clients that I wasn't prepared to be in the same room with him. There was one instance where he was brought into a room, and I immediately requested that he leave. The reason was that I had heard of his language at times, and maybe it was unfair to him. Maybe I was duped by the media. I don't know, but there was innuendo of violence, and it was completely unacceptable to me. But more importantly, Miss Leach, because the legacy media was repeating it so many times, and it was needing to be explained so many times, the board made the decision to issue this press release. This is the only press release of this nature that was issued where they identified a person and made it clear that they did not agree with, as it says, he does not speak for us. We expressly condemn any talk of violence from him or others.
Thank you. And then the final document, HRF 60513, page 3. I just wanted to ask you about this. This is one of your, I believe, text messages. Yeah, right there. Stop. If you can roll it up a little more. There, right there. I believe this is at least dated at the top, February 9th. Did you appear on Fox News?
That's correct.
And how did that come about?
I received on a daily basis 10, 20 or more media requests. Everyone from the New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, France 24, Belgium, Korea, Japan, and every Canadian news outlet. I did agree to do one interview, and I agreed to go on Fox with Premier Peckford.
That's Premier Peckford on the right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. Those are my questions, and thank you, Commissioner, for the extra time.
Okay, so we're pretty close to the time for the morning break, so I'm going to take the 15-minute break, and we'll come back and start with our list of cross-examinations.
The commission is in recess for 15 minutes. La commission levée pour 15 minutes.
Well, there we go. There's the morning. That's Keith Wilson, a lawyer. Just give me a second. I'm going to turn my generator off. Don't want any more interruptions. Okay, listen, I'm going to be frank. I'm going to be very frank. I'm going to be upfront, and some of you may not like this. I don't like the witness lawyering going on here. He's a lawyer, so it's just natural in him to do that. What I mean by that is the question could be, what color are your shoes? And then we've heard so much more information about not only his day that got up to it, and then what drove his decision for the type of shoes. And there's so much lawyering going on the stand that I'm not a fan of that. I would like to just get to the questions and to the points, because it feels too much like fixing things, covering things, because that's what lawyers are trained to do. Anybody else find it funny when they say recess? Do you think about schoolyard, going to the playground 15 minutes? Are they all running outside playing for a bit and coming back in? We get that picture. I think Simpsons did that to us once. They did a court thing where it was recess and they went outside to play. I think about that sometimes. Got some good notes for him. I don't have a guest. I thought I was getting close with John. John, if you're listening, I thought we're close to doing something this morning. You're definitely got some excellent perspectives that I would like to explore more. So if you ever get the desire to go ahead and chat some more, I'm not tough, but I will definitely challenge you. So if we want to do that, we can do that. We heard stuff about solicitor-client privilege at the beginning. We heard about his flight and his plane. I'm going to cover something about that. You know, some of you know I do hold a private pilot license. I'm GA. I'm not airline or anything like that. I'm not commercial. So I have the PPL, private pilot license, not CPL, commercial, or ATPL, which is the airline one. I'm just a little guy, but I don't have multi-engine, so I couldn't have flown his plane, but I'm familiar with what he was doing there, flying across country in a general aviation airplane. Most of those stops he mentioned were likely fuel, because you do have to pick up fuel all the way, along the way. But did you know that, yes, he was absolutely right. Vax, there was no restrictions at all. Think about that for a second. You want to get on a commercial flight, domestic or international, so many restrictions. In fact, you got to go through security at the gates, right? You all know this. You walk through security, the beep, 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 they're checking your bags. General aviation flying, you don't even have that. We don't have no security. We just go straight to the airplane and we fly. No vax requirements. All pilots were exempt. You were able to fly borders, non-vaxxed, as long as you're the pilot. That was the rule. It was not even a rule based put onto us. It was the airlines put on the rules to their pilots, and then the government put it on passengers. So there was some restrictions around passengers, but not for the pilots. Pilots, we were able to just jump up in the plane and go. We don't even have to go through security, let alone a vaccine questionnaire or something like that. Why do you think that is? Do we have a class system? I'm not trying to put restrictions everywhere, because there should be no restrictions anywhere. But, well, of course, chartered flights, you know, that's what the prime minister uses. That's what his friends use. They all got planes and stuff like that. They all pop around. You know, we certainly don't want to upset that class of travelers, did we? You know, luckily for a lot of us who were not vaxxed, that's the only option at the time to get across country fast. So I understand why Keith had to do that, because going from Alberta to Ontario is long. It's a long drive. It's a beautiful drive, but it's a long drive. So I get it. Why it became a point, though, was because Bridget kind of brought it out as a point for her. We're getting a lot more about the dynamic. And okay, you're here for honest opinion. You're here for unbiased. So I'm going to have to be. Look, I am a fan of the movement and what happened, but I'm learning more about the organization behind it. The very first thing that got my ear in a way I didn't like was when Keith referred to Tamara as a spark that lit this fire. The council picked that up as well. The commission council picked up as well, because we know that's not the case. It was Bridget. So this happens, people. This happens where someone else new comes into the equation. He's King's counsel. Like this is a guy who takes his profession serious. He's recognized, and he's good at what he does. He's evolved in quite a few things. Oh, but I think the spark that lit the fire when he made that comment was actually the spark that lit the fire in separating the group that was kind of coming together. This is what I'm getting out of both testimonies. So Friday's testimony, and then right now with Keith, there's clearly a dynamic there that would have been difficult for everybody to facilitate and make their way through. I was uncomfortable with his response to where did you come up with that spark that lit the fire, because his answer was my brain. Gosh, come on, Keith. Like, yeah, that might be the actual technical answer, but it should have been more of I just kind of made it up instead of like a my brain comment. But he did the second part of that. He went into that. Look, I'm not trying to cover for Keith. I think that I don't think he makes a good witness. I don't think lawyers should be witnesses sometimes. And I think there's an example why. It's not like he's wrong or he's giving bad information. There are many types of many types of witnesses, and a lawyer-based one is not a good one, in my opinion, because he talks way too much, and it does feel like he's sidestepping, and he might be. It's hard to understand sometimes. It's hard to really follow lawyers if they even are sidestepping. They're really good at that. Another thing I wasn't comfortable with, because this is what Bridget was talking about, was the expanding terms, I guess, for ending the convoy. So we got a document that was shared with GoFundMe, which basically laid out an expanding list of things, and it had the catch-all, which was basically, and it could evolve from there. You know, it is, I can see the breakaway now from Bridget. Bridget, I can see what you were going through there. This was a group of people that has some professionals and lawyers now, and all these other people talking all these words and act this and statute that, and, you know, experience here and King's Counsel and all that. I can understand why that became very intimidating and uncomfortable. Because I'm uncomfortable too, hearing them talk about what it was they were doing and how they kind of established themselves. Sans you were not one of the ones listed in that email. So I get it. And also to the convoy team, you stepped in it, because when you set up a council for the financing portion of it in order to work with the fundraising and be the official recipients of it, you had to establish yourself as the proper one. So you went through, I guess, all those steps, also not including the originator, but you were able to then establish yourselves as, at least at that time, the organization that was going to be going forward with it. You got no questions about how it's set up? You know, I'm sure everything's set up fine. Dotted your I's, crossed your T's, did all that, because there'll always be scrutiny later. But you weren't with the founders, the founder. So I can see why there's a dynamic there with Bridget, and why there's talk about lawsuits and stuff, because significant amount of money collected, and maybe more importantly for this group, a significant amount of money spent that wasn't reimbursed. Not just legal fees, but there was a whole bunch of people that was anticipating fuel and other costs to be covered, and it didn't end up fully covering it. So that might be part of the dynamic too, because this is what Keith is talking about. For example, when they're doing the letter and doing the drafting on their 2-engine plane headed east, doing the turbulence around the Great Lake. I don't know if they went over or around. It's dangerous to go over if you're a smaller plane. Probably went around. But anyways, a lot of bumpy stuff. And while they're doing that, they're doing the drafts. And inside the draft is a line that says vaccine mandates must be lifted. So he was asked, who said that? Like, where did that come from? And this is why I don't like lawyers as a witness, because his answer is a lawyer answer, talking about all the drafts, and it was going back and forth, reviewed by client, and then went to there, went to that. And then finally got to the end where the actual answer is, and he's like, I don't know. It was just at some point added. But that's why I don't like lawyers as a witness. They take a long time to get an answer out. Mr. Eros, I got to learn more about that. There was a lot of around that. Take Back Our Freedoms with Brian Peckford. There's a potential conflict of interest that had to be explored there. And there's some stuff going on around whether or not Keith has full waiving of client or solicitor client privilege. He talked about it at the beginning because it's incredibly important. The only way to not have to maintain the privilege is it's waived. Well, there's another way. It has to be like a severe criminal, imminent, harmful act. There's another way. But that's very extreme. That's like the EA version of waiving privilege. But for the most part, it can be waived. And then it got a little sticky because it wasn't clear on who had retainers with him, because there appears to be a gentleman who is not on their team anymore, but was kind of on their team at one point. I don't know enough about that person to know more about it, because obviously they're on the out, and I don't know what was going on in any of that. But it was brought up by council or committee council. So as we can see, committee council is being fair. They're going down the middle. Uncomfortable questions for everybody. Okay, uncomfortable questions for everybody. So this little kerfuffle around Brian Peckford, Take Back Our Freedoms, a conflict of interest, Mr. Eros. There's a little bit of something there. But I don't think Keith would be taking a stand or making any conversation or saying any statements that he didn't believe he was already protected on. And he kind of said that by saying, you know, look, I got an email from him that says there's no retainer. Keith will have a problem with that, though, because retainers don't have to be written. He knows that. They fight hard and push to written retainer as like the grand document, and sure, maybe, but he knows retainers don't have to be written. They just have to be agreed upon. So he may have a sticky situation around that. If there's somebody saying I had a retainer, he shouldn't have spoken because I didn't waive my privilege there. We'll see. It will already be on the record, so there won't be any way to like rip it out of the record. But there may be penalties or liability or civil something. But again, that's all speculation. I don't know what Keith has and what this guy has and where they're going with that. The MOU made its appearance again, that MOU, and Keith did some more lawyering there, and he let you all know that it's just a doc unless it's signed by all interested parties. 100% true. You cannot have a one-sided MOU. There's no such thing, because an MOU is a memorandum of understanding, not a memorandum of demands, not a memorandum of issues. It's a memorandum of understanding. In order to have an understanding, you need two parties. What's there to understand if there's a single party? That's a demand. So to be an MOU, yeah, it has to be executed by all interested parties. And the signature lines at the end were not. So look, what he was getting at there was it's not a legal document. It was legal nonsense. That's what he ended his little testimony there on that one. It was legal nonsense. And I get it. I'm trying to tell CBC that. They think it was like a binding contract that they're going to take over the government with. He did a good job at explaining what an MOU is, but he went a lot lawyering into it. Paul Champ, here you are, bud. You're making your appearance. First, you're suing very quickly, very early, while trucks are still spewing diesel fumes into the air, like you say, and you're serving them, naming a whole whack of people. Some of them weren't even his clients. Then the city injunction came up, the one that stopped the horns, whether or not they were going to fight it and cooperate and all that kind of good stuff. Because Mr. Champ was really pushing hard. He was providing lots of documents. There was no time to read the factum for the injunction. Like Paul Champ, the city, they were moving things quick and making things, they were lawyering. There's a lot of lawyering going on. And Paul Champ, again, I'm not anti-Champ. I'm also not for tax the rich there, Paul. You still have the sticker. I saw it today. But, you know, opportunity, there's a lot of people that were upset. So Paul represented them, I guess. But the process gets complicated. Meeting on a Saturday is very rare. So that must be an emergency injunction because that's very rare. But of course, the courts will accommodate emergency. Trying to get it to go to Monday would have been difficult because it was an emergency injunction. It would have been difficult to adjourn it. You know, if we want to move fast in our system, we got to be able to move fast. If we can just adjourn everything, there's really no point to try and have a accelerated mechanism. So I would kind of get that. It does suck that they dumped a bunch of info on you, but at the end of the day, you should be able to have a position to stand on pretty quick. Are you for the injunction, against the injunction? It turns out that Eva came up with a great plan to be able to offer a carrot, which was, well, we don't have much to offer. Like Keith said, we had empty pockets. We had not much to offer, but we can offer the consent to make it a long injunction because we expect to be here for a long time. So let's go ahead and make it a long injunction. And that's goodwill on our part. That's all we can offer is we will honor the injunction for a lot longer than you're asking for because we're going to be here for a long time. Good job, Eva. That's very clever. Because not only is it a concession in some way, some goodwill, it's also a good reminder to where your position is. You're not planning to go anywhere, so you may as well get the injunction to cover a longer period of time. Clever. I was really impressed by that. And so was Keith. He brought it up again. They started to get concerned about the change of tone from slowly. Am I done with Champ here? And then Champ stood up and did an objection. He's really... Champ is good. Okay, guys, like I kind of want to pick on him only because he's kind of silly sometimes, but he's doing a good job. He's making sure that people are clear on the testimony, especially from Friday, because Bridget specifically said that this letter or notice from Tamara, she posted it as fake news, but yet her name was being associated with it as being aware of it or received it. Whether or not that was the case, whether or not she reads her emails, whether or not she slowlies her emails, which is to skim it and ignore, I don't know, but that came up. And good job on Paul Champ, and also good job on Brendan.
Order allowed.
We're back. They're in my ear.
The commission is reconvened. La commission reprend.
Okay, the first up is for the Government of Canada, please.
Good morning. I'm Robert McKinnon for the Government of Canada Council.
Morning.
Mr. Wilson, I just want to take you to a point that you made at the end of your testimony with Commission Council. I don't know that we have to turn up the document, but it was in reference to an email of February 12th that you had sent. And the line in there that I just want to clarify is where you say, "We are trying to block Trudeau from having the jurisdiction to cause the police to use the new emergency powers against the truckers and to allow the truckers to stay here in Ottawa as long as it takes." Do you remember that line?
I think you misspoke. I think you meant to say justification. Does it say jurisdiction?
Oh, having the, okay, sorry, justification. Good memory. So is that not a reference to the declaration of emergency that was made the day before by the Ontario Premier?
No.
It does not speak into the future. It says to use the new emergency powers, which just came into effect the day before.
It was we had, so I had lawyers with me on the ground. I also had teams of lawyers back at their normal place of business. When an issue would arise, I would delegate it out. I would say, okay, this team in Toronto, I want you to review this. We even prepared a draft judicial review application for the both the city's emergency proclamation and the Ottawa, or sorry, the provincial government one. Media assessment is, what does this change? What impact does it have on the rights of the people on the ground? And we concluded that it was largely benign.
Okay. What I'm saying is that those words refer to the new emergencies power in the present tense. The declaration from the federal government came on the 14th. It was 2 days before.
Well, I can help you by telling you what was in my mind. And our concern was, I believe that it was early in the previous week. By early, I mean the Tuesday, and if not Tuesday, the Wednesday for certain, that we started hearing rumors that the federal government was contemplating invoking the Federal Emergencies Act. So all of the references in any of the communications that you have at that time would be, and unless there's one that's more specific, about that. There was, we weren't concerned about either the civic one nor the provincial one.
Can you point me to one document which documents what you're just telling us now?
Well, first of all, this was not a normal file.
Right, but you've managed to paper
Can I
this
finish
file.
my,
Sorry,
can
okay.
I finish
Go ahead.
my answer,
Sure, go
please,
ahead.
sir? This was not a normal file. I did not have opportunity to document things. I'm telling you under oath that at no time was either the Ottawa State of Emergency Declaration nor the Ontario State of Declaration a matter of concern for me and the other lawyers with me. We were very concerned about the potential and the rumors we were hearing for the federal government to invoke the Federal Emergencies Act.
Who told you the federal government was considering using the Emergencies Act? Who told you that?
I can't remember the specific individual, but I do remember the source that they relayed, and they advised that they had heard from some MPs that there was active discussion over at the Parliament about the Prime Minister considering using the Emergencies Act. And it was so MPs, some MPs had shared with people involved in the convoy, and they reported that to me.
Do you have any document you can refer this commission to today?
I might, but I can't recall any offhand.
And you can't recall any offhand? You can't recall a description of the document or anything like that right now?
No,
Okay.
that's correct.
All right, I'd like to continue with just confirming some statements from your witness summary. You'd agree that there was a broad array of groups that were part of this convoy,
Correct.
and you subdivided them into 3 groups: those who came to support the movement, those who came to take it over,
Mhm.
and those who came to seek a piece of the $10 million.
That was my assessment. Probably I reached that conclusion in my mind within, I would say, 3 to 5 days of being here. I had had sufficient interactions and repeated interactions with different individuals from different groups that was the pattern that I felt was present.
And you also have said that the convoy attracted a lot of strange people.
Yeah,
And in those people, you mentioned the Coven of Witches.
that's what
And
they
you-
called themselves, and they were doing weird seance things and burning things in the lobby.
and conspiracy groups like Digilo, the
Yeah.
QAnon. Yes.
Yeah, you bet.
So it not only consisted of a broad array of groups, but it attracted other strange groups that, at least as you've described them, correct?
Like moths to a flame.
So you'd agree that some of these individuals, we've heard a little bit already, may have tried to hijack the message or even try and control perhaps parts of the convoy group. Is that correct?
Yes, and it was a constant effort by Ms. Leach, Mr. Barber, and others to fend them off, so to speak. And I do recall reading documents in the record where CSIS and the RCMP had also intercepted communications and reached the same conclusion that there was a concerted effort by the mainstream group to resist these hangers-ons.
Okay. And Mr. Barber testified yesterday that he could not control truckers generally. They're very independently minded, and certainly not the groups that were coming. Would you agree with that assessment?
That's correct. Yes, I would agree.
And there's in Mr. Aros's interview summary that you've been taken to a little bit, a reference to, or at least a quote that you supposedly mentioned concerning taking back our freedoms group. Yes. Did you refer to them as bad actors?
I don't think I would have referred to, no, I don't know that I would have referred to them as bad actors.
Okay, he says you did.
Yeah.
And bad actors and manipulators, he says.
I would have characterized without a doubt some of the individuals involved with that group as being manipulative, 100%.
So even within your group, the convoy group and the leadership that you've mentioned, there were, would you say, sort of divisions or factions, I would say?
Absolutely. It was an incredibly diverse dynamic. Remember that if you walked into the operations center at any given moment and said, how many people in this room knew one another before January 15th? And the only 2 people would put up their hands would be Chris Guerra and Chad Eros. These people all came together for the first time.
All right. And you mentioned the negotiations with the city of Ottawa in the days leading up to February 14th. Yes. To move the trucks out of residential neighborhoods to take at least a bit of a valve to some of the temperature that had been raised with all the complaints and issues that arose from that. That's correct?
Yeah, and the tensions with the police and the political tensions. It was time to de-escalate and reduce the footprint and relieve the pressure.
But that was never intended to rid the city core of the gridlock of 30-ton trucks or resolve the grievances of all the various protesting groups.
There was no gridlock. I've described how I was able to travel freely.
Well, let's just say you're not saying that it was empty of 30-ton trucks sitting in front of Wellington.
No, the idea was to concentrate, and this was discussed in the negotiations with the mayor. The mayor's message that I received through Mr. French was that he recognized that the grievance, I think it's even in his letter, if I'm not mistaken, that was with the federal government primarily was the triggering event, the federal mandates that you've heard about.
But your deal,
Sorry, sir, I haven't finished, and that was slowing down because commissioners reminded me that I'm speaking too fast. So it was recognized that trucks would remain on Wellington. And to be clear, there was no understanding that it would be a grant of immunity. It was recognized that at any time after those trucks repositioned, the police could come and move them out. It was recognized that there would be an interference in the flow of traffic on Wellington, but I note, because I was up there the other day, it's blocked today, this very moment, by government barricades.
okay, I'm just getting to the point that the deal was never intended to resolve all these grievances and protests and to get rid of the trucks from the city core, correct?
No, it was absolutely to remove the pressure on the downtown residents and businesses, focus the attention on the grievance with the federal government, build from the success of de-escalation and negotiation to incentivize and encourage the federal government to come to the table, open up a dialogue, and set a pretext for the truckers to go home.
Would you be surprised that the mayor would say that the deal was to just release some of the tension from the neighborhoods? It did nothing to deal with the core issue of getting rid of the trucks in front of Wellington.
I don't know. Do you want me to repeat my answer a third time?
No, I don't need that, but I've got your answer. So you don't agree that this deal was intended to resolve all these issues and gridlock on Wellington?
Complex problems require complex solutions. Complex solutions require phasing.
So you had faith?
I had faith. I had confidence in the goodwill look.
Do we have an agreement, a written agreement that said they would move?
I have been able to resolve at least more than 90% of all the litigation files I've been involved in by opening up dialogue between the parties. And I remained optimistic that through applying those skills and those tactics that we could have had a peaceful resolution and a respectful Canadian dialogue about important policy issues.
Who were you representing at the negotiations? Were you representing the leadership that you mentioned, that the directors of that company, the nonprofit company, the Freedom 2022, the president, Tamara Leach, and the vice president, Chris Barber, and the treasurer, Chad Eros? Beyond those people, who were your clients?
You've described them. That's accurate.
So you were not acting on behalf of all of the truckers?
That's correct.
So you had faith?
I had faith, and my faith in the same way, I would have quit practicing law, sir, a long time ago if I didn't have faith in the ability of people having civil and respectful discussions to resolve disputes.
But the objective of that agreement was to move 25% more trucks into the Wellington Street area. So it doesn't do anything to relieve that congestion.
Fair, but we've already established, sir, that the road's blocked today. So I'm not sure if your concern is about the presence of trucks and Canadians or whether your concern is about the road being blocked. It can't be the road being blocked because it's still blocked to this day by the government.
You have heard or you're aware of the evidence given at this inquiry of the racial slurs, the intimidation, the threats against Ottawa residents and public officials, and the blaring high decibel horns at all times of day and night during these demonstrations in Ottawa. You're aware of that evidence, correct?
I'm aware of the allegations, and I'm
Okay.
also aware of what I experienced, which was Canadians, particularly immigrants of all ethnic backgrounds, coming together in a very peaceful, respectful way with a deep concern about what the federal government and governments were doing to their rights and freedoms.
I'm just talking about those particular allegations right now, okay?
Yes.
As a lawyer, you would agree that those are not protected as a form of free speech or action under the charter.
No, I don't know that I'd agree with that. I need it. You have to be very contextual specific. Our free speech rights are very broad, and just to say that someone made some vague
So
allegation of racism is not enough for me or anyone else to make a reasoned conclusion.
you agree hate speech has been codified in the criminal code, right?
Yes, and I find the Prime Minister's hate speech towards unvaccinated people and saying, how do we deal with these people, deeply troubling.
Right. So you don't agree then that threats against the life of somebody is not a protected form of speech under the charter?
I do not believe that anyone, either morally or legally, should be threatening anyone else's life. And I have received many death threats myself since representing the Freedom Convoy.
Okay, so we agree that that's not protected, right? Death threats are
yes.
not protected.
Correct.
Nor is speech that is looking to demean to an extent a particular group of people in a serious way.
Sir,
Hate speech.
I'm going to have to object at this time. My friend is entirely mischaracterizing the law of Section 2B of the Charter and the decisions in respect to that. In fact, the Supreme Court of Canada, of course, has held that hate speech, other than inciting violence, is actually protected by Section 2B of the Charter. And so I would ask that my friend essentially cease putting errors of law to the witness on public television, sir.
I am just asking for his view as a lawyer, but I don't have to continue. I have other questions.
Mr. Commissioner, I hate to interrupt the proceedings, but I've received an email communication from our certified transcriptionist asking if parties, when they're making objections from the floor, to please state their name first. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay, I think this is proper cross-examination, so go ahead.
Okay. So you'd agree trucks do not have charter rights?
Yes, obviously.
Good. And you don't have the right to park somewhere for 3 weeks, wherever you want, whenever you want.
I was asked many times, every day, by truckers when they recognized me, and they would say, Mr. Wilson, am I allowed to have my truck here? And if they were parked in the parking lane, I would say it depends. What does the sign say about how long you can park? You might get a ticket. If they were parked in a driving lane, I had the same response to all of them, which was, you tell me this. If you were to stop your truck in the number 2 lane on the 401 and get out and leave it, what would happen? And they would say the OPP would come, they would ticket it, and they would tow it away. I would say to them, you're in the exact same situation here. No, you cannot lawfully park your truck there. There is an interesting argument because they were told to park there by the police as to whether they might have an officially induced error defense, but that was the answer that I would.
Okay. You'd agree it's not a protected right under the charter?
Of course.
Okay. And neither is blaring high decibel horns a protected form of speech or action under the charter?
Well, there was, and I'm not trying to be cute about this, but you're asking me a very nuanced question because charter rights, especially when you get into freedom of expression, are nuanced. There were times where these dance parties on the weekend, and I said this and it's in the transcript, but when I was before Justice McLean, because we did have a discussion about whether there was an artistic element, and the trucks would start with the different frequency of their horns, would start doing dance beats. So there was that, but it's clear Miss Leach and Mr. Barber were clear that they did not want the horns. Before the injunction, the week before the injunction, the truckers agreed amongst themselves to have a quiet time from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. because they wanted to get sleep too. The injunction allowed that to be expanded.
Well, people weren't dancing to these horns that were going all hours of the day and night. You've heard the evidence from the residents.
I witnessed people dancing a lot to the horns with the music. I'm sorry, sir. That's what I saw. I'm under oath.
Yes, at 1 a.m, 3 a.m.
Yes.
And okay.
I did.
I
I
won't
wasn't
go
on the
any-
street at 3 a.m, so I can't say, but I was at least once or twice leaving meetings at 1 a.m.
I've got your perspective. Do you recall a second press conference that you gave on with others on February 6th? So this one you were more organized. I could call up document COM. I think it's 50856. It's a transcript of that. There, you attended, Ms. Litch, Mr. Bulford, Mr. Dichter, and Tom Quigan. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall that?
I believe that was a press conference that Mr. Dichter had asked that was primarily focused on Bitcoin. It was in the Sheraton Hotel, and I and Miss Litch were asked to come to attend the first part of it to provide a legal update and an operational update on where things were at.
So these were people who are all part of your group. Is that right? So Tom Quigan, Mr. Dichter, Mr. Bulford, Ms. Litch, that they're all part of your convoy group leadership, would you say, or part of your working group?
They're part of the Freedom Convoy, about as far as I'd be prepared to go.
Okay. And you worked together.
I worked with lots of people every day on a wide variety of issues.
And Tom Quigan is an ex-military intelligence officer, correct?
That's my understanding.
And he worked in the operations center, is that right?
He was mostly, I almost never saw him in the operations center at the Swiss. He was almost always at the ARC, and he was doing these on his own initiative, these daily situation briefs. They were not reviewed by anybody. In fact, I still haven't even read most of them. We had no time to even read them, and he was circulating them to the truckers.
Now, so he did write daily intelligence reports and special intelligence reports on certain events, correct?
That's my understanding, yes, and I've read some of them since preparing for this.
And do you place credence in his assessments?
Sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't.
Are you okay? Well, we could take you to who he is first. Page 12 of this document. Where it has his Tom McQuiggan's, if you go down to line 12. So are we on the right page 12? Okay, I've got page 12 here. Yeah, so yeah, that's it, yeah. So it says, he describes himself, I'm ex-military intelligence. I also worked for the RCMP for 6 years in national security, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. I'm one of the few court experts in the country on terrorism, and I'm a declared court expert in criminal court, and which is to say Ontario Superior Court as well as the federal court. Do you see that?
Yeah, I've since reviewed his CV and confirmed these things to be true.
Okay. And he did put out reports every day, right?
I don't know if it was every day. I was a few days in that I learned that these things were occurring. I think they were distributed to the block captains, if I'm not mistaken, in the morning.
Yeah. So
You're going to have to get to the point quite quickly. You're already over time.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take you to one of the threat assessments right now.
Okay.
One of the daily assessments. It's document HRF 123456018. So you'll agree that there were people attracted to the convoy, not only strange, but who had violent tendencies, if you could look here. So this is on February 3rd. This is the day I think you arrived. Here, the assessment is Freedom Convoy 2022 assessed that potentially violent protesters may arrive in Ottawa to vandalize property. Following that, they will then attempt to blame convoy members for the violent actions. The protesters are likely to arrive in Ottawa either late Wednesday or Thursday. The violent actions are likely intended for Thursday and Friday. The actions from the protesters are likely to consist of harassment of citizens and damage to vehicles and properties. And then they describe how they're going to be dressed. Do you see that?
Yeah, I recall that. In fact, we were received a separate briefing, and this actually was raised by GoFundMe executives and their legal team on our call on the Thursday. And it was Antifa. They had previously come in on occasion and knifed trucks, cut the airlines, knifed tires. And they had announced on social media, I was told, the Antifa group, that they were going to be coming in a larger numbered force and trying to do more damage to the trucks.
So if I might ask one more question, Mr. Commissioner, just on, it's on a document that the transcript, if you could pull up the transcript again, it's page 14. It has to do with tow trucks, an issue that everybody seems to have an opinion on. So this is Tom McGuigan, again, in the interview. That's right. So he says concerning tow trucks, the short answer is tow truck companies right across the country in Alberta, Ontario, whatever, have either politely refused requests from the government to assist or not so politely refused requests for assistance. And if you turn over the page, well, sorry, go down to the bottom of that page first. What it shows is the federal government in Ottawa is reaching all the way down to Buffalo, New York, trying to find a tow truck, and they can't get one because the, turn over to the page, trucking industry is somewhat of a brotherhood, much like the military, much like the police, and we do kind of all know each other, and no tow truck company that wants to be in business for more than a week after this is going to help out. And it goes down a couple more paragraphs. So what's actually happening now, we have a network of tow truck operators who are talking to each other to see who's being called and who's not. Short answer is they're having a hard time getting tow trucks. So was the convoy actively trying to prevent the use of tow trucks?
No, there was never any of the rooms I was in, and I was usually with the leadership at all times, any effort, attempt, or even discussion about reaching out to any tow companies to discourage them. And we know from the evidence from the police and the previous days of this inquiry that, in fact, the governments were able to get tow trucks.
So that contradicts what Mr. McGuigan just said in his press conference on February 6th.
And corroborates my evidence that sometimes I agreed with them and sometimes I didn't.
Thank you.
Okay, the Ottawa Residents Coalition, please.
Paul Champ for the Ottawa Coalition of Residents and Businesses. Commissioner, I'm going to, I don't think I'll have any difficulty finishing within time, but just like advise, the City of Ottawa has offered their time to me in the event I get close. So. Mr. Wilson, just have a few questions for you on your testimony from this morning. First is with respect to your flight to Ottawa, how you got here. Mm-hmm. There was a news report that was on a charter flight operated by Northern Air Charter. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think that's the name of the company.
And apparently that company is now under investigation by Transport Canada for carrying unvaccinated people on that flight. Are you aware of that?
That was the allegation by CTV, and my understanding is an investigation was commenced, but no action was taken.
Okay. And who originally offered to pay for the flight? Was that Mr. Bourgault?
I'm not, as I testified earlier, entirely clear on who was offering. I don't remember it to be Bourgault. It might have been Take Back Our Freedoms. I believe there was a couple of people. And as I explained, we had this pattern where people would come forward and say, oh, we'll look after this, we'll look after that. And it didn't happen. There was some uncertainty as to whether or not we were even going to be allowed to get on the plane. But the Justice Center said, this is too important. Get on the plane. We'll sort this out later.
Okay. Now, before you got on the plane, I understand from the interview summary of Mr. Eros that there was a virtual meeting or a Zoom meeting on or about January 31st, where there was yourself, Andre Mamari, Brian Peckford, Tamara Leach, and himself and Joseph Bourgault. Do you recall that?
It was on the evening of the 1st. It was the reception they had in the hotel was terrible, terrible. They've only heard probably a third of what we talked about. Mr. Bourgault was not on that. There was a doctor with a British accent, very nice man. I can't remember his name. And Mr. Peckford was most definitely not on that call.
Was not.
Was not.
Was there another virtual call with Mr. Bourgault and yourself and Mr. Eros?
I have never had a virtual call at any time in my life involving Mr. Eros and Mr. Bourgault ever.
Okay. When you arrived in Ottawa, you testified that it was apparent to you that Ms. Leach really was the leader of this movement. You said that it seemed that people listened to her. She seemed to command a lot of respect and so forth. That's right?
Yeah, and even if you walk the streets when we were moving from one location to another, it was remarkable the people that would come up and stop her and politely ask if they could have a hug. And the tears would just start to flow. And often I was standing behind her and I would hear what these incredibly tragic stories that these people would share, and the grown men, and about how they'd lost children to suicide, they'd lost their businesses, they'd lost their marriage. And it was Tamara and seeing what Tamara was doing that had given them hope.
I guess, was it also in part because people knew that she had control over the $10 million from GoFundMe? That's why she was a leader?
Tamara figured out something way before I did. And I remember it was my fault. I thought someone was coming up to hug her. We were leaving the Westin Hotel after coming out of the meeting with Dean French on the Friday night when he had presented the mayor's proposal. I thought it was someone wanting a hug, and it turned out it was a TV crew from Berlin TV from Germany. And I felt bad because we tried to protect Tamara from that. But when they asked her about the 10 million, she responded by saying the money's symbolism. The money is symbolism. It was, and if you look at how much money actually got to the truckers and how much was actually returned to the donors, the vast majority ended up back at the donors. And as you know very well, otherwise it's in the escrow fund under court supervision, partly over which you must receive notice before anything can happen to it. So the money was symbolism in Tamara's view, and I think she's right. It was a way for Canadians to demonstrate and add their voice to what they thought the Free Convoy stood for, which was holding the government to account and advocating for respect for our charter, return to the rule of law.
I wasn't going to ask a question on this, but I couldn't help when I heard your testimony about the horn injunction. You testified that you advised your clients that the horns were a problem and that you expected that the injunction would be granted. And you were asked a couple of times by Commission Counsel about whether your clients oppose the injunction. Just to be clear, your clients oppose that injunction, correct?
Thank you. I honestly can tell you, Mr. Champion, as you know, one of the things that happens to me when I come to Ottawa, I meet you. and I mean that in a respectful way. You've been very professional in your dealings, and I thank you. I actually, as I was asked that question, couldn't remember whether I actively opposed. So if that's your memory, I agree that I probably did do as lawyers do oppose, but what I remember more clearly is advising my clients that there was no way that the court was not going to grant that injunction.
You had argued that the horns were not irreparable harm and Ms. Lee should wear earplugs. Do you remember to sleep? Do you remember those arguments?
I don't, but I have confidence in you. If that's your memory, then I'll accept that.
Okay, I won't go further down the road of the different arguments that were made. But then on the continuation of the injunction a week later, as you remember, that became a bargaining point with the city. You were offering to the city that perhaps your clients wouldn't oppose the continuation of Ms. Lee's horn injunction if they did certain things. Is that right?
That's correct. And my memory, I'm hoping, is correct that you recall we did not oppose that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's right. You did not oppose the second one. I want to ask you some questions about dealings with the police. Now, you've testified that you were hearing at times that there were police raids imminent at different times during the protest. And we did hear some evidence from the police that there were raids planned at times that then were aborted. So it sounds like you might have had some solid intelligence on that. Is that fair?
Well, actually, we thought we did, but after having observed the proceedings since the last few weeks, we had no idea of the level of dysfunction, of infighting that was going on. We assumed that when information filtered in to the operations center that a raid was going to occur at 9 o'clock that night at this location, that it was real. And then when it didn't happen, the assumption was it was a test, not that there was something happening where different inspectors and forces were in conflict about a plan. We did not, that was all new revelations through this inquiry.
Yeah, those new revelations, I think that's one issue your clients and my clients can agree on for sure. Now, but you were getting information from sympathetic police, is that right?
That's correct.
Throughout?
Yes, there was. The remarkable thing was that all these different individuals who had experienced, I was never, prior to this, a big believer, I didn't think they were a bad idea, but mission statements. It was remarkable how efficient everybody worked because they all had the same mission statement that they had formulated deep to the core of their being, was that they felt the country was badly off track, that their families and their communities were being harmed, and this was their opportunity to try and make a difference. So we had former police officers, military, Navy, CSIS, airline pilots, doctors, nurses, teachers, carpenters, chiropractors. The whole breadth of society was there, and the cream just rose, and they organically came together during the time in those who were getting things done. There was very little infighting. There was a lot of people coming in that we were trying to manage, but it was really remarkable, the organic way in which the enterprise ran.
So that if people could cook, they were cooking. If they were IT people, they were helping you with that. If they were communications people,
well, and
I still remember
if they were
police and had intelligence, they could share you with that.
One really illustrative example was in the operations center, mid-morning, super cold outside. Some people are the big, huge square table, people working, people standing in groups, people looking at things on the board. And then someone came in and said some situations occurring at Albert and Kent or wherever it was. And everybody stopped for a minute. No one said what needed to be done. Two people got up, threw their coats on, grabbed their toques, and they were gone. And then everybody carried on. It was so efficient that there was no point even discussing what needed to be done and who was going to be doing it. Once the information came in, the people who knew they were best suited for dealing with it did. It was spectacular to watch. That's why I now believe mission statements are very important.
Now, on some of the things that people were doing cooperatively with the convoy, we heard from both Ms. Belton and Mr. Barber about the distribution of cash to truckers. You knew that was going on, right?
I observed it, yes.
You observed it. And they were trying to keep track of how much cash is being put into each envelope before it was being distributed?
Yeah, that was really Chad Erose's department, and he has given interviews that are online where he describes Chris Carson's interview where he describes the processes that he put in place. But I did observe cash being counted. My understanding was it was coming from the stage and from other places, and being put into envelopes, and then teams would go out and distribute it to the truckers.
But Mr. Eros, he was one of the directors of Freedom Corp, correct?
He was not only a director, he was a treasurer, and he was a paid accountant.
Right. So he was gathering or trying to keep track of that money on behalf of Freedom Corp, right?
I would hope so.
Right. And as an advisor to Freedom Corp at that time, you were aware that they were managing this distribution of funds and cash out to the truckers?
He was, yes.
Okay. And he had estimated that it seemed that around $20,000 per day was being raised through cash and e-transfers. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
I think the first time I saw cash would have been probably around, just trying to visualize a calendar here, probably around the 11th or the 11th, maybe. Yeah. And that weekend, the 12th. That was after the provincial government in Ontario, the Attorney General, issued the seizure order that you're familiar with respect to the Give, Send, Go funds. And much like what you saw happen with when the police said no more fuel, if you bring fuel to downtown, you're going to be charged with counseling mischief or something. The next day, Ottawa residents and everyone showed up with gas cans. It was an I am Spartacus moment. And what I observed was people were so determined to support the truckers that because the GoFundMe got shut down and now the Give, Send, Go was being frozen, they weren't going to let that discourage them. I heard anecdotal stories from many truckers where they would get the tap on the door and someone would be there with their family and give them $20 or $100 or $1,000 or $5,000.
So in your statement, you say that some people were at the protest for money. Is getting all of this cash, do you think that was an incentive for the truckers to stay?
Not the vast majority, because that wasn't why they were there. There's always opportunistic people that are more focused on money than others of us. That's all I meant.
And those trucks, the 300 to 400 semi-tractor trailers operating 24-hour or idling 24 hours a day required a lot of diesel fuel, correct?
Not as much as if they're pulling a load.
For sure. But who was paying for all of that fuel, the big trucks, fuel at Coventry?
I know we put in your action with the Mariva injunction, there's details on that in the affidavits. But I also know that I was told by a businessman who wanted to donate fuel that he had contacted or had his office contact 3 different fuel suppliers and the bulk suppliers. And he wanted to pay for a shipment of fuel from each of them. They declined because they said the best they could do was put him on a waiting list. They had so many people phoning from across the country to pay for fuel to be delivered downtown that they actually didn't want his money, and they said all they could do is put him on a waiting list.
So just a couple last points, Mr. Wilson, just about some of the people who you're involved with. Pat King, you testified that you knew him from about a year before the convoy protest. Is that right?
Yeah, like I wasn't at his house or anything. And
no.
Yeah, he had gone on this highly misinformed rant on social media, and he was attacking a reporter. And so it's always dangerous on Twitter. I jumped in and explained the law and showed the pleadings to show where he was misunderstanding how the law worked, and he hadn't set this big precedent. But he's a loud voice like Chris Sky.
Right.
So I was aware of him.
But Mr. Sky is from Ontario, generally speaking. Mr. King is from Alberta, like yourself, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Sky made his way across the country a few times.
Yeah, more of that. But Mr. King, he is in Alberta, so you did have some interactions with him.
You know, there's 4 million people in Alberta, right?
Yeah, but I presume you don't have interactions with all of them. I'm asking about Mr. King, not all 4 million.
The first time I was in physical presence of Mr. King was when he showed up in a boardroom in Ottawa during the protest, and it was about 2 or 3 days in, and I immediately instructed him to leave the room. Not him. I told the people around he's got to go. The only other direct interaction I had with him was on Twitter in the previous about 18 months prior to that, where he was misunderstanding a ruling by a court judge.
But Mr. King, my understanding, he was a supporter of Western separatism and so forth, Wexit and those kinds of movements. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that. It wouldn't surprise me, but I wasn't aware of that.
Were you involved in those movements, Western separatism?
I've never formally been involved in those movements. I have been very concerned about the merits and the fairness of our confederation, but seeing, as you've heard, and I saw it myself, a Quebecer with a Quebec flag running towards an Albertan with a cowboy hat and an Alberta flag and embracing, seeing a Quebecer trucker who could not speak any English with a trucker from elsewhere in Canada, I don't know where he was from, who couldn't speak any French, and they were using Google Translate in a Tim Hortons to communicate, and they were laughing and getting along. It restored my faith in the future of our country.
So just the last person I wanted to ask you about while you're talking about French, Mr. Dean French. Mr. French called you a patriot, is that right?
I believe that's in the text message, yes.
Yeah, he supported the movement wholeheartedly, did he not?
It's clear, you'd have to ask him, but it was clear to me that he also had concerns about government overreach, and that the truckers were protesting that.
And I thought I understood from your text with Mr. French, he's the one that arranged that interview with you and Fox News, is that right?
He did, but I also received phone calls from Fox News. I received emails from Fox News. They were all about the same time. I mean, that's how these guys work. When they really want to get somebody, they reach out to everybody they can. I don't know that it was because of Dean that I got it. It might have been, but I had emails and phone calls from Fox News independent of those, just like I had been contacted by the New York Times and the Washington Post and everyone else.
But he was assisting you.
I wouldn't say he was assisting me. It was something he did on his initiative. I think he thought I would be a good interview.
I was surprised to see you on legacy media like Fox News. But
well, you know, I guess we all get surprised.
This last piece, did Mr. French ever indicate to you whether he had had any communications with Premier Ford about his views about the protest?
He never did, but my clear sense was I'm not very familiar with the goings on in Ontario politics, but I had a general sense. I think I might have Googled him, and I think I got a sense there was some estrangement or some falling out between him and the Premier, but I
was just wondering if he ever communicated anything like that to you.
He never brought up. The only time he would have made a reference to the Premier was, like the whole Twitter account thing, that because we had the problem with BJ Dichter logging into Tamara's Twitter account and sending out that one tweet. And he said, multiple people have access to this, right? And I said, yeah. And he explained to me that when he was chief of staff to the Premier, they had a rule. 3 people had access to the Premier's Twitter account, but 2 of them had to agree to a tweet, no one person. And I said, yeah, it would have been nice to have known that.
Just on that though, Ms. Leach also put out a live stream on Facebook saying she wasn't supporting the deal that night.
That's not true.
That's not true. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. And next is the City of Ottawa. Am I to take it you have no questions?
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you. Next is the Ottawa Police Service.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wilson. My name is Jessica Barrow, and I'm counsel for the Ottawa Police Service. I just have a couple of points I want to walk through with you. So first of all, I want to make sure that the record is very clear about who you do represent and who you do not represent. So as the representative for Freedom Corp, you represent only those organizers that I believe you listed earlier in relation to Freedom Corp and not other participants in the convoy, correct?
That's correct.
And so specifically, you do not represent Pat King or James Botter?
That's correct.
And you would agree with me that both Pat King and James Botter were espousing views that your clients disagreed with. Is that fair?
At times, yes.
Okay.
Not universally, but some of their messages they did not agree with.
And we saw specific evidence of them kind of rejecting the views of Pat King and James Botter. Is that fair?
Yeah, James Botter, there was a number of times where they were preparing a press release to distance from the MOU, or they were going to add it to a paragraph of a letter. But if you've ever drafted by committee, you know that everybody wants their piece and certain things get left out. But I think they made it pretty clear that they did not support the MOU, and nor did they support, and they were very concerned about any innuendo of violence from Mr. King.
Right. So speaking of violence, you indicated that at the time you sort of advertised on TikTok that people should come to the city. It was your view that was because it was a lawful and peaceful protest in Ottawa. Is that fair?
Yeah, and it was more than that, because one of the things that I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a dad, and my wife and I have 4 kids, and it was remarkable to me meeting many of the families with younger children. I mean, 5, 6, up to 12, 14, and the amazement on their face. They're interacting with all these different truckers of every ethnic background and other Canadians, and the excitement and the pride was really historic. And I commended those parents for having their children learn from this and participate in it and experience it firsthand. It was very safe. I never imagined that the police would use the level of violence that they did.
So you were aware, however, that, and there were multiple warnings to that effect, that arrests were going to be taking place very shortly, correct?
The warnings really accelerated on the Thursday. And when Mr. Barber asked me to do his TikTok, that was on the Wednesday.
And so when you're speaking of peacefulness and lawfulness, I take it you're not referring to those individuals that were charged with criminal offenses prior to that date in relation to violence or threats or weapons?
I'm not following your question. What do you mean?
So I believe you've seen the institutional report from the Ottawa Police Service. It's been made part of the evidence.
Yeah, I've only had a chance to skim through parts of it.
And would you disagree with me that multiple charges were laid prior to that TikTok video in relation to criminal offenses that related to violence or threatening behavior or weapons?
I do know that the statistics were clear, that the crime rate had gone down. I do know that because of some of the former police, paramedics, emergency services people that were in the operations center explained to me what happens in Ottawa. I think it's called Blues Fest, and the amount of assaults and violence that, and even on Canada Days, the amount of assaults and violence. They told me, having attended and participated and been on duty on those events, they had never seen this number of people come into the downtown core with this level of safety and absence of violence. So that's what I knew.
Okay, but my specific question was, when you're referring to a peaceful protest, I take it you're not referring to the people who were engaged in criminal behavior that was obviously deemed not to be peaceful.
Well, I mean, it's a peaceful protest. Were there some people within a large crowd of 5 or 8 or 10,000 people, as there were on the weekends, that engaged in criminality? That's called normal.
I'm going to move on to the deal with the city officials. We've heard quite a bit of testimony about that. And I think it's clear that your understanding of the deal always was that some trucks would move on to Wellington, and I think your evidence was around 25%, and then the rest would leave the city core. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right. And so I want to bring you to HRF 0000513. at page 52. And just for your reference, these are the text messages between you and Mr. French.
Okay.
And actually, could we go to page 59? I apologize, Mr. Clerk. And so we just heard very briefly from you in relation to the tweet that went out. I think if you scroll down a little bit. And that's the tweet that's being referenced, right? This is an article about the tweet where it comes from Tamara's account that it's a denial of the deal. Is that correct?
Yep. Yes.
And so regardless of who ultimately authored the tweet, it was coming from Ms. Leach's Twitter account, correct?
Mr. Dichter has confirmed that he was the one who did it.
Right, but in terms of how the public received it,
Mhm.
it came from Ms. Leach's account, right?
Yep. And
Okay,
within minutes of being informed of it, and once we found out, Ms. Chippick and I got to the bottom of it, and that Mr. Dichter acknowledged that he had done his own tweet, and then he logged out and logged back in as her, and then retweeted his tweet with a quote that it was him. We said, you got to fix this and you got to fix it fast, because I have an email from him where he agreed to, confirmed his consent, good to go. So he was the one, we were trying to think of wording that could go out to confirm the deal was still going ahead, and he decided that he would play the tweet as though the reporter had made a mistake, and I think he says something like, nice try, so-and-so. We were talking about the federal mandates. The deal to move trucks tomorrow was going ahead.
can we just scroll down a little bit, please?
Sure.
And if you keep going down,
I think you just passed it.
no, I think if we keep going down, sorry. Right there, yeah. So this is Dean French saying it was posted 2 hours ago and no correction yet. So it does take some time, right, for the tweet to get corrected. I recognize there may have been some inner workings going on, but it takes at least a few hours for that to get corrected. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't dispute that. I can't remember. I know that we were able to correct it around, it was either 10:58 p.m. or 11:02 p.m. Dean had strongly recommended that we correct it, get to the bottom of it, figure out what happened, correct it in advance of the 11 o'clock news hour shows. And I moved as quickly as I could to get to the bottom of it because I was completely blindsided by it.
And there is, I won't take you through the whole exchange just to save time, but there is an acknowledgement from Mr. French where he's saying it would have been nice had it occurred prior to the 11 o'clock news. So would you agree that it didn't get corrected prior to the 11 o'clock news? Is that?
There was many times where Mr. French and Mr. Peckford said, oh, it would be nice if you could do this. And I was like, I don't think you are appreciating the dynamics of this environment. It was extremely chaotic.
Would it be fair to say that through this text exchange, and I can walk you through it if need be, but to save time, that Mr. French was expressing concerns about the impact this tweet would have on the legitimacy of the deal publicly?
As was I.
You shared those concerns.
Yeah, I received feedback from a lot of the people I was around that they were struck how calm I was most of the time. There was one notable exception where I was arms flailing, yelling, likely swearing at a very loud voice when I was like, who did this and what just happened here? I was because I and others had worked very, very hard to get us to this point. We had the logistics meeting at City Hall with IOT and the city manager and Drummond. We had report heard back that the trucks were ready to roll. Some of the guys were packing up some of their gear. And I was like, oh my goodness, we've come this far and we're going to get sabotaged.
And you would agree that because of that miscommunication, it would have created a lack of clarity to those following that account about whether there was or there was not a deal. Is that fair?
There was that lack of clarity even prior to that, because this is the Sunday night. So when the pamphlets were being circulated and people would get them, they'd go, oh, this is fake. Some people thought that it was actually counterintelligence propaganda either by the government or by the police. That's why the plan that we developed had teams of recognized road captains and other truckers who were very much recognized from the journeys to Edmonton to go out in teams to the various blocks to personally talk to as many truckers as possible so they knew it was real.
But notwithstanding that plan that may have been engaged, we did hear from Ms. Belton yesterday that she was of the view at that time that it was fake news. And in fact, she put a video out on TikTok that said it was fake news. Is that correct?
I can't recall. I think that was played yesterday. Sorry. Yes.
Right.
Correct.
And so even at that time, there was still a lack of clarity, even amongst organizers, as to whether there was or was not a deal.
I would say it differently. I would say that subsequent to leaving Ottawa, when they've reflected, they're remembering events differently because there are emails.
Sure, there may be emails, but the TikTok video was put out to whomever Ms. Belton's following consisted of, correct?
Fair enough.
Right. And so I just want to bring up, you mentioned that the flyer that got circulated. Could we bring that up, please? That's HRF 1259. If we could scroll down to the bottom of the notice here, this is obviously the notice we saw earlier that got circulated, correct? Sorry, if we could go, yes, right there is perfect. Is this the correct version?
I believe so.
And so
Actually, if you scroll down a little bit, I can tell you if it is. Yes,
okay.
This is the final version.
And so we see here that it says, if that's perfect. The truckers on the Freedom Convoy board plan to start repositioning our trucks forward on Monday to consolidate our protests to the streets in front of Parliament. There's also room for trucks to relocate to 88. That's the site out of the city, correct?
Is one of the 3 sites that existed at the 88 is the exit 88, which I understand is near Enbrum.
Would you agree with me that nowhere in this letter does it say that 75% of the trucks are going to have to leave the city as part of this deal?
Obviously.
Right. So there may have been a lack of clarity about that issue as well.
There was a lack of clarity about many things, but most of the truckers would have, some of them wanted to go. Some of them wanted to go, well, just like look at Mr. Barber. First, he had his truck downtown on Wellington, and on his own initiative, he moved it out to Arnprior or Embrun, one of the two, on his own initiative. He didn't want his truck downtown. Others wanted to do the same thing. These trucks were covered in salt. It's not a good thing to do for a long time. They'd set up truck washes at these places. Mr. Barber wanted Big Red Clean. So this was not to be a precise document to enumerate every nuance of what we felt was going on at the time.
Fair enough, but you would agree, and we saw evidence of that in the video at Rideau and Sussex, you would agree that where there was a lack of clarity about what the police were up to, it created challenges for the police in managing the situation. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and that's the learning from the video, because you saw me walking with the PLTs. We kept walking, and I had a meeting with them. And Tamara was there as well. If you pause the video, you'll actually see us walk past Tamara, and then she comes up and we talk, and we're like, okay, what are our lessons learned here? How do we do this differently? And number one was don't do it at night. Don't do it at night. That's why we shut down the moves partly on the Monday, because it was getting dark. That was a huge error. And Tom Marazzo had actually said earlier on, we don't make any moves at night. It's just too dangerous. But it also changed the dynamic of the crowd. And that's why we needed this coordination with the police. We were very optimistic with the truckers, and a lot of them went out. It wasn't just Chris. There were several of them that were on their feet moving. If you look at some of the videos, you'll see them running along the sidewalk. You'll see the police cars, and then you see the trucks, and you'll see Chris running. And we were doing it.
And the PLT were alongside doing that as well, correct? In terms of trying to get truckers to move in response to the deal?
They weren't trying to get truckers moved. They were trying to get the other people in the police to agree that the truckers could move. On the Tuesday morning, a delegation of PLTs arrived unexpectedly for the first time ever at the Swiss Hotel. I was in a room working on the letter with Tamara for the Prime Minister and the Premiers, with the one that's been put in evidence. I got a knock on the door. The PLTs were there. I went in, and that's on the Tuesday. They said, like, they sensed something was wrong, and like the trucks are all wanting to move, but they said to me it was only a 24-hour deal. I said, look at the letter. With a large logistical exercise, the mayor's letter will take 24 to 72 hours. He looked embarrassed. He went over into the corner by the bathroom. He got on the phone, turned around. His face was a little red, and he said to everybody, sorry, major miscommunication. We're going to go out and try and get the trucks moving. So it was, the PLTs were not trying to convince trucks to move. They were dealing with the police hierarchy and trying to get them, whoever kept blocking, to stop the blocking.
But I think after that miscommunication was clarified, PLT did work with protesters, and ultimately some trucks did move.
Not
correct?
on the Tuesday.
No, I'm talking about in general in response to the city deal. Some trucks moved.
Oh yeah, well,
testified.
over
Yeah.
100 vehicles, over two city blocks were cleared on Albert. 100 vehicles left the downtown, including around 40 trucks, 23 of which, I know it was 23 because I reported the 23 count from Chris. He phoned me and I said, how many do you have on Wellington? He said, we moved 23 to Wellington. If you look at my text message, you'll see 23 onto Wellington. But it was 40 semis moved in total. The others left. And we know for sure one of them went straight home.
Okay, you're well over your time.
Could I just
so
ask
you're
one
gonna
more
have
question,
to-
Mr.
Yeah.
Commissioner? Thank you. You were here when Superintendent Drummond testified, and he testified that there were challenges with getting some of the truckers to move in response to that deal. Do you have any reason to disbelieve that evidence from Superintendent Drummond?
No, we anticipated that there would be some holdouts, but we also knew that they wanted to be part of the group. And we anticipated that once most of them moved, the holdouts didn't want to just be sitting there by themselves, and they would move.
And you testified that you were taking that on faith. Is that correct?
That was our expectation, and it bore out to be true on the Monday.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the indulgence.
Okay, counsel for former Chief Slowly.
Thank you, Commissioner. Afternoon, Mr. Wilson.
Good afternoon.
For the record, Tom Curry for Chief Slowly. You were present uninterrupted here in Ottawa, February, if I have it, February 2 to the 21st.
19 days, yes.
And you've described for the Commissioner your observations of the scene on the ground. Did you observe the enforcement action that was taken?
Yes, the vantage point, we had Ms. Chipiak and I, we set up a little operation center of our own, because we also had to monitor the bail applications and coordinate with the criminal legal teams. And we could see, we had the view of the backside of the Westin and that tunnel. So we saw all the police, all the highway buses coming in with the police filing off. And then we also, of course, had the television on. So we were watching the live streams from CTV and CBC as we were looking out our window and actually watching. We were quite high up, like the 17th floor, and then getting various reports. It was a very, very active environment.
Had you given advice about the implications of the Emergencies Act, the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and what it meant for the protesters who were in the areas that had been, who were affected by that?
I had given advice to the board as I've testified on the Wednesday. I had done the TikTok that the board and Mr. Barber requested on the Wednesday. I wasn't, because Ms. Leach instructed myself and Ms. Chipiak to go to an undisclosed location because she was concerned. She had no idea what was going to happen to us. We followed her instruction. And after that point, I lost any ability to do any large scale communication that I can recall.
Right, understood. Did you see the flyers, the pamphlets, the information distributed by police to protesters
Yes.
through the police liaison teams?
To be precise, sir, when I say yes, they had a big blue outline and some of them had a red outline. They were placed on the windshields. And I saw that was the calm before the storm. So it was the Thursday. There was a ceremony at the War Memorial that I attended along with my wife. And I remember stopping and reading the warning that if you didn't leave, I'm going by memory, that you would be ticketed, your vehicle would be impounded, and I can't recall what else it said.
Okay. Now, you told us that you had involvement with the PLT police liaison team members. Were they on Ottawa Police Service and OPP?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other police officials that you dealt with face to face, or was it exclusively PLT?
I had interactions with chance meetings with some OPP and other police. They were extremely friendly, very cordial, very non-threatening. But in terms of any, official formal interactions, it was the PLTs.
Okay, thank you. And of course, your role evolved as you tried to provide the convoy organizers with a legal strategy or input into their strategy from a legal perspective and advice to achieve their objectives. Is that fair?
Yes.
Your contact with protesters, I think you told the commissioner, just to clarify, these are independent operators. Yes?
Yeah, reminded me of the ranchers in Alberta. Yes.
Indeed. And you told us that they came here, and I'm not going to say every single one, but would it be right for the commissioner to understand that those protesters who you encountered came here to Ottawa as part of the convoy, intending to protest for the weekend, but were inspired to stay as a consequence of the response that they observed from Canadians as they came here and once they arrived?
I think they were inspired and they felt charged with a new responsibility to ensure the protest was successful, a responsibility they didn't realize they would be invested in them when they set out. However, I do know, having reviewed the evidence, that in every instance that I have seen, Ms. Leach was clear that at no time did she say we're leaving after the weekend. I believe she said we're going to stay until the mandates are lifted.
Right. The independent operator protesters, though, do you agree with me that because if they're not on the road, they're going backwards financially, right?
Correct.
And so would it be right? I understood your evidence to mean that the protesters, the independent operators, leaving aside the organizers and their message, that the protesters were invested in a shorter protest than they were inspired to commit to once they got here. Is that fair?
Do you mean the opposite of what you just said?
Independent operators who came here weren't intending when they let me start over again. The inspiration that you've spoken about, that acted on them to stay here and protest longer than they would have originally. Is that
yeah,
fair?
I thank you. And I wasn't trying to be unfair to you. I had a number of truckers say to me that they originally planned, as you've already heard from Mr. Barber, to be in the convoy for a day, join it for a certain distance, and then turn around and reverse course home. And then they found themselves in Ottawa for a prolonged period. Yeah, that's part of that synergy of growth that occurred.
And you told us that there were some challenging members, even among the top group or the leadership group. You've called Mr. King, I think in your statement, a rabble rouser who was at least, if not encouraging violence, tolerant of violence.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he was very angry and frustrated and really wanted to fight hard to get the government to change course. And not all of us use the same approaches.
Mr. Dichter was undermining the leadership,
I
or at least in part.
yeah, I've just never been able to understand Mr. Dichter. I mean, and the other thing is that he wasn't there that much because, firstly, he had left early before I arrived in late January, and he'd had a car accident, I believe, near Kingston. And then he returned on the Friday, the 4th of February. And then early that evening at approximately 6 or 7 p.m., as he was leaving the front door of the Swiss or the Arc Hotel, he fell and badly broke his ankle. So then he was away at hospital for a period of time. Then he was restricted to his room because he just had a wheelchair and crutches. Then he had to go back for some surgery. So he was out of the loop a lot.
Right. And then, Mr. Bowder, you've described the MOU was not helpful to the main strategy the organizers were pursuing. Fair?
A distraction and false hope.
Now, that meant all of it in the aggregate, in addition to the independent minds of the independent operators, that controlling this entire group was very challenging.
It was impossible.
And one of the things, could I show you, please, just to see if this quote is accurate, in HRF, please, Mr. Registrar 1379, just while that's coming up, Mr. Wilson, that I think you gave an interview to Mr. Lawton, who has published or was publishing a book about the events of the convoy. Do you recall that?
That's correct.
Can I just ask you, please, to look at this and just maybe to the top, just to orient the witness, just a little higher. There's an email, I think. There we go. Do you recall seeing this?
Yes.
Could you please go then to, I think it's page 5. There is a quote attributed to you. I just want to make sure that it's right there. It is. And for context, Mr. Marazzo had also spoken about some of the events, and the last line of that part, you see it at the top, no one could force the truckers to do anything they didn't want to do. And you seem to have agreed to say, we don't control them. We don't even know who they are. No one signed up. It's not a curling bonspiel. It's not a golf tournament. And you made the comment that you can't simply tell them what to do. Fair comment?
Yeah, and that's why we had to use other approaches of moral suasion, of leadership, of recognizing their fatigue, recognizing the desire of many to find a graceful and respectful way, a proud way to get back home.
And the Ottawa Police Service, in your interaction with them, expected and reasonably expected that a peaceful protest, a lawful protest, would be held in their community. Fair?
I have to assume that to be true.
And the unlawful, you raised the issue with my friend, Mr. Leon, about when did it become an unlawful protest? And you've answered this question to others. I won't dwell on it, but certainly you would accept that the blocking of municipal roads, the violation of noise bylaws, and other forms of what might loosely be described as harassment as part of that demonstration would be a challenge for police in confining the protest to a lawful protest. Is that fair?
Well, if you and I mean you and I, happen to be walking down Wellington on February 10th, and we were having a chat lawyer to lawyer, I don't think we would conclude that you and I were breaking the law by walking down in front of Parliament, on the sidewalk of Wellington Street. So this was the challenge, is that you had individuals who I had told consistently when they asked, of course you can't park your truck there. And I always used the analogy to the 401, which they got. Yeah, I wouldn't be allowed to do that. This is no different. But for this potential, and I really wouldn't get into it, most of them about officially induced error, because they were told to park there and then they were barricaded in place. So it was this weird mix where you had people lawfully, in my view, walking, mingling, shopping, interacting, some showing signs, some not, some just wanting to take it in. with others who were breaching various parking bylaws and, municipal ordinances and provincial statutes.
And just a couple of quick things then, Mr. Commissioner. On top of that, you also face the challenge of some, I think in your statement, you may describe them as strange people who had descended into the protest, often in the evening, often on the weekends, some sovereign citizens, others who were, I think you may have labeled them troublemakers. That was a challenge for the convoy organizers to deal with, of course.
Constantly.
And challenging, obviously, for police and residents.
Yes. And there was a good cooperation there, when that was the rule. So everybody had a block captain, and if an Antifa was going to show up, the rule was you phone the police, you call 911. And the frustration for us was the next day, 3 people from Antifa came in and vandalized trucks. The next day, the police chief or whichever one would hold a press conference and say, last night we had 3 charges for property damage in the downtown core. And we're like,
you closely watch the signals coming from all levels of government, including the Police Services Board here in Ottawa and the Chief Slowly, correct?
Yeah, our most acute concern was the level of pressure we saw building on the police slowly from the Police Services Board. That's what motivated Mr. Marazzo to take a series of steps to cause the city meeting to facilitate some action to reduce pressure.
Including through your efforts with Mr. French to avoid what I think in one of your text messages to him was a bloodbath.
Yes, and the first one though was it was 2 distinct strategies. One was immediate acute, which was the pressures we saw on Slowly before he was no longer chief. And the other one was a broader exit plan.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is the Ontario Provincial Police.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. The OPP have no questions today.
Okay, thank you. The CCLA, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Eva Krajewska for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Mr. Wilson, just briefly, were you still on the ground in Ottawa when the financial institution freezing orders started to come into effect?
Yes, just to be clear, there was 3 instances related to freezing that I was dealing with, well, 4. And no random order just off the top of my head. The earliest one was a threat of an interpleader application by TD Bank through their external counsel. The next one was the ex parte order obtained by the Attorney General of Ontario under the Criminal Code declaring the donations proceeds of crime. Then the next was a freeze order of sorts. And then we had the emergency measures, the financial measures. And then after that, we had the Mariva injunction.
Okay, I just want to ask you about the financial measures under the Emergencies Act.
Yes.
Can you just, did people come to you from the Freedom Convoy and ask you for advice with respect to the orders and relate to you how they were affecting them? And can you just provide if they did, could you just provide a summary of how the orders were affecting them if they came to you to speak to you about that?
Every one of them did in real time, and they were finding out at different times. I still remember one of them coming to me and saying, I just got a phone call from my wife. She's at the supermarket. She was with the kids. Grocery cart was full. She went to pay with the debit card. It didn't work. There's a lineup of people. What's going on? Because now the conveyor is full with the next person's groceries. And then she tried her Visa card and her second credit card, and none of it worked. And she had to leave the store in great embarrassment and phoned her spouse and said, what is going on? We had other people that were trying to put gas in their vehicles and couldn't. There was more than one instance where people needed to get prescriptions filled, could not. And then subsequent to that, as we worked to get the freezes lifted and reached out to the bank, we developed this template email to write to the bank, to ask the bank to respond to us as lawyers, Ms. Chipiak and I. Then we have received reports since, and to very recently, that a number of these people, even though their bank accounts were unfrozen, sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I just realized how fast I was speaking. After their accounts were frozen, have been denied credit applications. And I have explained to my clients and others who contacted me that the Canadian Bankers Association representative who testified before the House Committee said that each of these persons will have their accounts, their names marked, flagged for life.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Okay, convoy organizers, any questions?
We have no questions, sir.
Thank you. Any re-examination?
Yes, just 2 points. Mr. Wilson, in response to my friend Mr. McKinnon's questions about whether you were referring in that email to the Federal Emergencies Act, I believe you said that someone had heard from some MPs that it was under active discussion.
Yes, we'd heard it a number of times over the course of the week prior.
Do you recall who was telling you that?
No, it would have been someone coming into the operations center that had heard from an MP. I remember hearing, because I would say, well, what's the source? And it was some MP, and I can't remember. I don't believe it was indicated as to which party, whether it was the Liberal, New Democrat, or Conservative MP, but it was, I guess there was strong rumors over in the Parliament that it was under active consideration.
And in response to my friend Mr. Champ's questioning you about the injunction, I think you acknowledged that you did oppose the initial application.
Yes.
Now, can you help me with this? I understood from your evidence that your clients had been concerned for some time about the horn blowing.
Yes.
And I believe you said that they took their own action even before the injunction.
The truckers had agreed amongst themselves, and this is in the transcript and represented, I believe, in an affidavit actually, before the Superior Court in the injunction application, that they'd put in this informal protocol of being silent between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Justice McLean on the Saturday application had suggested the parties consider agreeing to maybe allowing 1 hour for horns during the noon hour. But when we returned on the following Monday, that was something he wasn't interested in entertaining.
And so can you tell us, if there was this concern, why was it that you were opposing the injunction? Wouldn't it have been consistent with your client's views to have an injunction and stop people blowing their horns?
The board was split. Other members and some of the truckers felt that it was something that they shouldn't be restricted, other than the agreement they had for night quiet from being able to blow their horn. They thought it was part of their right of protest. So there wasn't unanimity in the client group on that point, and the instructions that I and Ms. Chipiuk received were to oppose it. Now that Mr. Champ has refreshed my memory.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's completes the cross-examinations. I just have one question, and it's with respect to something I believe was heard early on. Was there an area that was allowed for protests or encouraged by either the police or your group to carry out protest other than on Wellington Street? I'd heard something about near the War Museum. Are you aware of anything like that?
Yeah, no, there wasn't. And that was one of our frustrations, Mr. Commissioner, was that we were always faced with this zero-sum choice with the police liaisons. We were trying to, I really believe that if we could have a stepped type process, a ramping down, and building off success and building trust. But no, it was always the number of calls in a day. And if you look at my phone logs, you'll see the number of calls in a day I was receiving from the PLTs after I became more involved in that. And it was always the same question: Keith, what's the exit strategy? You know, it was always, when are everybody leaving, sort of thing.
Okay, so you're not aware of an area near the War Museum that was, that protests were allowed and were carried out?
There was an area, I believe, along, if my geography is correct, and it may not be, along the Sir John A, where they had set up, and you'll see this, there's photographs of it, and I don't know, but there was never any discussion or offer from the PLTs for anything other than ending the protest in its totality.
Did you ever specifically ask the PLTs for an area or a manner to continue the protest?
No, I did not. Other than taking the steps of this de-escalation and reducing the footprint to Wellington.
So you didn't ask and they didn't offer?
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your evidence. We're going to take the lunch break and come back in an hour with a new witness. Thank you.
The commission is in recess for 1 hour. La commission est levée pour 1 heure.
And if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.